special meeting to order. Go ahead.
For roll call, Mr. Parsons, not here. AJ Mentel,
Present.
Roger Daniel,
Here.
Nancy Griffith,
Here.
David Cash,
Here.
Tara Ramsey. Not here either. And Gabriel Shainline. Alrighty. Roll call is held.
Okay.
And then, again, we do have the sign-in sheets for the special meeting going around, so everyone can just also sign it.
I'll go ahead and just let our consultants take us away. There's nothing else clerical that needs to be done, I believe.
Well, hi everyone.
Hello.
Great to see you again. This is our third installment of our study sessions, updating the development code. Brent's gonna lead off the presentation, but I'll just bring us up to date of where we're at. This is our, as I mentioned, this is our third time in front of you. We've decided to break up your development code up into bite-sized chunks, ideally so we can focus on and take piece by piece as opposed to a larger comprehensive update all at once. So today what we'll be focusing on are the general development standards. So there's a lot to get through, but I would say the breadth of information that has actually changed has been pretty narrow in our focus, but there are a lot of topics that are covered in the draft that we have before you that we'll talk about. So with that, I'll hand it to Brent and we'll get into the topics tonight and we'll go over our questions that we have. We'll be facilitated a very similar format to our other study sessions. So if you have questions as we're going through, please interrupt us. We're taking notes actively and we're more than happy to engage in conversation throughout the presentation.
I'd just like the record to reflect that Will Parsons is not present.
Okay. So if you remember from our last meetings, the first study session we had with everyone focused on administrative provisions, looked at permit processing, functions of the code, who is the review authority, and what does that review authority include, and the different types of permits. Our last meeting, we focused on your zoning district provisions. So we looked at the different zoning districts within the community, how that tied back to your comprehensive plan, so that consistency connection between both documents, which is one of the big reasons the city's undertaking this project. And then it looked at all the different allowable uses and the permit requirements, and then we looked at accessory and temporary uses as part of that effort. Now, as Michael mentioned, we're in this third phase, which is kind of the final piece of the trifecta, I'll call it. And we're focusing on the general development standards, which focuses on a series of chapters within your development code. Everything ranging from parking to landscaping, your building and architectural standards as it pertains to single family, multifamily, commercial, historic preservation, parkland dedication. And so what we've done as part of this effort is we've worked with your city staff, specifically the planning division, to highlight areas that, one, needed some clarification, were vague. Two, were subjective in language. When you think about a development code, it needs to be objective, it needs to be measurable. When you have that gray area, that's when it causes some problems. When you're evaluating a project or making recommendations to yourselves, the planning commission, or up to the city council. And then any other inconsistencies within the document, and then just taking a pass at best practice. Looking at some of the code pieces that were updated back from 2018 where there could be some modifications or tweaks. So as part of what we're bringing before you this afternoon and evening, focuses on these general development standards, and these are the 7 chapters that we've taken a look at, chapter 1208 through 1220. And similar to the format of the other meetings that we've held, we'll walk through each of these sections, describe what is within the section, and then go over some of the key modifications and changes that we've been working with city staff on, and then ask a few questions of you. Not each of these will have questions, but if you have questions on these sections, please feel free to stop us and ask. This time is for the benefit of Planning Commission as we work through this draft. And so we just want to make sure if there's any questions you have for us or city staff, we're here to answer any of those. If there's something we cannot answer on the spot, we'll work to get a response back to all of you. So I'm gonna start off with 1208. So this is your general development standards. That's the title of this section. It includes a multitude of components within this chapter. Some of the major recommended changes and modifications that were made included a new purpose and applicability statement. So this is kind of the hierarchy when you go to the Development Code of Chapter 1208. It didn't really have a resounding purpose about what is the intent of this section, where other sections did have that. We felt that that was a missing gap, so we worked with your city staff to come up with a new purpose and intent statement explaining that these standards apply citywide and augment your zoning district standards and your accessory use standards, which are by zoning district itself. So we've added that. We also expanded the applicability of the intersection visibility standards. And if you're familiar with those intersection visibility standards have to do with safety concerns when you have development or you have fences or walls or landscaping that comes up to an intersection that causes lack of visibility for pedestrians and vehicles. So within the development code now, there are separation requirements and minimum height requirements that you cannot exceed in order to have a clear visibility path for vehicles and pedestrians. In your current development code, it actually excludes residential development from having to meet the visibility intersection standards, which seemed peculiar. It applied to commercial, it applied to industrial, but it didn't apply to residential. So we had that open dialogue with city staff and said, well, it should apply to all development as it comes up to an intersection. And so there was an agreement between staff that we should make that modification so it applies all. So we did strike that. So that was a major change. Overall consistency use of titles, acronyms, and permit types. So from our past two meetings, there were recommended changes to some permits, the structure. Consistency within a code when you're doing an update like this is key. The last thing you want to do is open up a code and it sounds like 12 people wrote it. So same voice, same terms, it carried those through. We've also added objective criteria for when a permit is required to repair or replace a wall or a fence. The way that the standard was written is it actually didn't give any objective measurable standard for what is a repair or what is a full replacement. And so what we've done is we've worked with city staff to add in percentage requirements. So if you're replacing more than 40% of a fence, that's not a standard repair, you'd have to come in for a permit. That sort of objective criteria just wasn't included within the code now. And I think that's gonna help not only staff, but the applicants and community members understand the process of how to undergo some modifications on property. In this section as well, we also clarified the allowance of chain link fencing, primarily for residential, where it's allowed along the perimeter. It's not prohibited outright, but there are limitations on placement and some aesthetic issue. So in the general development standards, there were limited modifications made, and I don't know if the Planning Commission has had the ability to look at the track change draft that was provided, but I just wanted to open it up to the members who are here to ask if there are any questions on the draft that was provided, any thoughts on some of the major edits that we have made or brought up as part of it. And I'd like just to open that dialogue, probably hand it back to the chair to facilitate discussion if there is any on that.
That'd be specific to chapter 1208, right? Correct. Okay.
Oh, well, we're on 1210 now.
I think we had just skipped one ahead.
Yeah, well, open to the board. Personally, I don't have anything about those specific chapters, but if did everybody have a chance to review the material supplied? Any thoughts for this chapter?
Makes sense.
Okay.
I will say we did take a look, the lighting standards are also within this chapter. After reviewing the lighting standards, they pretty much align with best practice for planning and zoning. So there were no modifications made to that. So there are other sections. I know the list on the screen may seem small. Chapter 12.8 is quite large, but we did take a thorough review of the entire chapter just to make sure that it was up to par with expectations of the city. Okay. building and architectural standards. This is chapter 1210. This has to do with the design of the exterior design of developments ranging from multifamily, commercial, single-family development citywide. This over the years has garnered a lot of attention from Planning Commission, from City Council, from community members, and think back to the allowability of exterior materials. That was probably one of the biggest things that's come up as of late. And this is a really important chapter because this drives the outward image of the community. So for what Middletown wants to be perceived from a design perspective as it relates to different development types, these are your set of standards which drive that. Now, through our review, we had a series of stakeholder interviews at the front end of the process where stakeholders weighed in and provided feedback to our team about what they felt worked and didn't work as part of your current building and architectural standards. We've provided that set of stakeholder interview feedback to city staff and have gone through it and have taken into account with some of these edits what we heard through those stakeholder interviews. Part of the stakeholder interview process highlighted the fact that design is very important, but design also comes with a cost implication. That cost implication, the developer doesn't hold on to, they pass down to the buyer. And part of that is trying to meet your target market where they're at. So good design usually, and I'll say usually with the quotes, usually costs more. And so trying to meet what the demographic is in Middletown based on an affordability aspect of new construction coming in. They did make some suggestions on potentially reducing the size of single-family residential, which we have talked about at prior meetings. They made some recommendations on allowing different type of garage types, adding more flexibility within these standards, but also making them objective. Because when reviewing this section, there were several areas that were subjective in nature still, that kind of just left a gray area. And that would be hard to interpret not only on the staff end, but as Planning Commission and a community member when reviewing these standards. So when we took a pass at this chapter 1210, we made some updated recommended changes, and I'll go through some of these, and then I have the draft open in particular. Before I get into these changes, I do want to check with city staff. I know that this section, as I had mentioned, catches most eyes from a political standpoint. Were there any other observations through the draft that you saw that you think would be beneficial for Planning Commission to know before jumping into it?
Personally, I don't think so. I'd let Tom have some input on that as well. But I think, I mean, from my perspective, when we look at the development code, permitted uses and architectural standards are two of the biggest things that we work with developers, right? Where can they go and what can it look like? So, I mean, with that, I would say chapter 1210 does, it gets, I think, a lot more visibility across all the chapters. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, just from my preliminary review, looking at it, I didn't have any additions on top of what we've already talked about. I'm a fan of pictures. I'm trying to add as many pictures to match the text so people can see exactly what that text is to mean. But otherwise, yeah, I think it captures what the vision of what Middletown is trying to create, make their town look like. Because that's what this will do. How do you want your community to look?
And that was important. If you remember at the beginning of the process, we had the community workshop last October, and then we had a community-wide survey that went out. And design was at the top of the list, wanting to emulate a more well-thought-out urban fabric for Middletown. There were a lot of comparisons to surrounding jurisdictions, how they handle multifamily development, single-family development, commercial development, and how can this technical update elevate that. And so that's where we took not only the stakeholders, but what we heard through the community, and made some modifications. So one of the biggest things is adding more graphics. It's very hard sometimes when you're reading standards to actually visualize what something looks like. So as part of the draft, we updated graphics that weren't entirely clear and added some new ones. And I think through this process, we'll probably add more. The more graphics, the better. I'm a visual person. I do this for a living, and sometimes I read it and I gloss over. And if I gloss over as someone who does this for a living, that's problematic. So what we wanna do is try to explain these graphically where we can. So if you had a chance to look through 1210, there are new graphics that are inserted in. We would be open to suggestions of additional graphics, if you think that there are other ones that are necessary and would benefit from this. Gonna beat this drum more, use of terminology, acronyms, same here across the board. We also updated definitions and architectural terms to make sure that they aligned with the type of standards that the city is looking to implement. We updated the cross-references to corresponding zoning districts. This is important when it comes down to the different typologies of development as they relate in the allowable use tables within your zoning district provisions. The biggest piece that we did was we expanded the development and design standards for mixed-use development. So in reviewing 1210 right now, we have our single-family, we have our multifamily and commercial, but mixed-use was kind of absent. And a part of this, in your comprehensive plan, mixed use is called out as a future land use that the city would like to see implemented within the future. But there's no development or design guidance for that within the development code. So what our tact was, we worked with city staff to expand a set of development and design standards that pertain to mixed use. And in this case, when we're talking mixed use, we're talking a multifamily residential component and then a non-residential component. Now, both of those can happen within the same building. Some people think of it as what's called vertical mixed use, where it's stacked, commercial on the bottom, residential on top, or horizontal mixed use, if you're familiar, which just means there's a commercial component and a residential component on the same site, but they're not necessarily in the same building. So what we provided was some design and development standards for mixed use development, specifically if you're doing a vertical component, that you have to have a commercial active, like non-residential ground floor use. Now, that ground floor use, we would prefer that to be a commercial or office in nature, but realizing that brick and mortar has changed over the last 30 years and the last 5 with COVID, everything's pretty much moving more towards online, that we do have built-in standards that allow that active bottom floor to be amenities for the building. So whether it's community rooms as part of a project, or a gym, or lobby access, that could also count as active space. Realize you might not be able to fill it with commercial. That may be unrealistic in some areas. So we did include that. Now with the mixed use comes other design considerations when we're talking about, I'll use the word more intense development. So if development is backing up to single-family neighborhoods, what's the impact and how do you address that? And that's not really addressed in the standards as it's written now. So I just want to go through a few questions. I think I have about 5 of them that deal with this section. And we will touch on some of these newer standards that we put in. We'd just like to get the Planning Commission's thoughts on this. Yes?
Brett and Michael, we're doing interviews for superintendent, so I have to leave you, and I figured this is a great time I just want to stop in. I thought I had more time, but they're ready, so I'm so sorry.
Great, no worries.
No
Thank
worries.
you. I'm sorry, guys. Thank you.
So the first question that we'll follow up on here has to do with the ARB and their review of design standards. So within chapter 1210, there are provisions that allow the ARB to actually waive the architectural standards. And this came up in the review that we had with city staff going, well, should there be a process to actually waive the standards? If that's the intent and the expectations of the community to have a cohesive design throughout the city, should there be an ability to disregard them through an architectural board, which is supposed to be enhancing architectural design within the city? And so part of this is, we wanted to have this conversation with the Planning Commission is that something that still should be considered? Should the ARB have the authority to waive these standards, or should these standards be a base minimum for design? And so I wanna hand it back to the Planning Commission. I know that's a big question, but it's pivotal as part of this process. It's a big piece. So I just wanted to gather some feedback from all of you on what your thoughts.
I think about
are.
3/4 of the architectural review board cases that we have are materials,
Mhm.
where people want to build a metal garage, and nobody can really afford to build a brick garage or even stick build. So we basically try to get them to make sure that it looks good.
Mhm,
You know,
mhm.
it has gutters, it has downspouts. Make sure that, that the colors kind of match the house as much as possible. But that's one thing that we tend to waive quite often.
So you find so would you say that the standards as written now in the development code are too onerous, and that's why you're having waivers come forward?
Well, if you can't have a metal building, yeah, it's a little bit onerous.
Mhm, mhm.
So my initial thoughts on it are, I like being able to have flexibility built within the code, but also it is, you know, if a majority of the cases that are coming up are, you know, based around this one, you said it's mostly like materials, right,
Yes.
for construction. Could it be that the waiver itself could be modified to, I don't know all of exactly what can be waived, so I'm kinda like shooting in the dark, but is it possible to just reassess the contents of what can be waived, retain the waiver, change the way that it works to be a little less like permitting, but still allow for chances for experimentation or new things that aren't explicitly prescribed in the code already, but it's just a thought.
Mhm. I think we can play around with the applicability of the waiver and what it covers, and there could be limitations on when it's used.
Is the question to allow the planning department to make a decision on its own rather than, as far as a waiver is concerned, waiver with criteria? Obviously a waiver, that's where I think if we vest in the, if we allow for a waiver,
Mhm.
there needs to be some strict criteria to allow a city employee to issue a waiver over a review by the planning commission. I think waivers are probably a good thing as long as
Mhm.
there's some criteria within which to act.
So almost like a refined set of findings that would have to be met in
Mhm.
order for that waiver to be applicable.
I think the criteria is established in the code.
Well, and that's
So
one.
that's the thing that we get hung up on. It's like, the criteria that staff review is within the code also already established and adopted by council. So it's not up to us, there's not a personal preference on how it gets selected. The irony of this architectural review board is that we'll pass that on, and then by code, it says it can go to the architectural review board. Well, the architectural review board doesn't agree, like for finances or whatever else, they override council's policy on the document, you know, on the code. We find that as a fundamental flaw.
So the question becomes, does the architectural review board, should it have the authority to override what has already been
Yeah.
Or
And if
should-
we're- and if
or
we're
should it
reviewing-
exist?
analyzed?
And if we're reviewing them based off of like a financial condition, like that also circumvents the code.
Mhm.
I'm not calling out you specifically, but those instances, if it's going to the ARB, that is taking away the integrity of what the ARB was created for in the first place, to enhance standards, not diminish them.
Mhm.
What do you want your city to look like?
Mhm.
Are we okay with steel roofs, or do we want shingles? Are we okay with brick, or is it okay to throw on hardy plank that's just gonna blow off and deteriorate, or vinyl that's just gonna deteriorate with sun? Like, what do you want your community to look like?
Mhm.
You really gotta think about that.
Mhm.
Other thoughts?
I mean, without actually having it in front of me and looking at it, I don't really have anything other than the concept of like, yes, flexibility, but, you do bring up good points about what it means for the, like, the process and the integrity of the code, but I still feel like that the resources that we have available to work with are probably going to change as the future unfolds for this town, right? So it's kind of, so I don't wanna get too hung up on it, but we might have to come back to how we build our buildings just to be sustainable, but like within my lifetime, but that's not a topic for now.
Do you find, in your experience with other entities and municipalities, is this sort of setup common, or is this kind of an unusual paradigm of, I mean, especially the way you put it, I mean, it's very, it is odd when you put it that way, of, you know, council who's elected to lead the city and make these decisions, but then those decisions are kind of undermined by this other
I get
entity.
completely overridden.
Yeah, that it does sort of.
The way that it's
point
written
that-
and carried out, like,
Yeah. In your experience, is this kind of an odd thing, or is it common to have something like this?
We flagged it as an area that could be problematic.
Mhm.
So we see some jurisdictions do this, but I think
Sure.
to Community Development Director Smith's point, it does cause a potential consistency and an overarching issue. And so I guess in our minds, what we would see if there was another way, or another tool, another application. I know built into the code, there is some minor discretion that I think the planning division has based on what an applicant can come, and it's like a percentage base. I think that would be a tool that we would rather kind of rely on than another waiver mechanism to further deviate from established standards. So, yeah, I would say each location is gonna be unique, but we did flag this as an area where it could further down the road cause some consistency issues.
I think it undermines what the purpose of the ARB is. I think Tom touched on that, though.
Mhm.
It's to further enhance the design within the community, and it's actually getting watered down.
Yeah.
So I think I think it's a bigger philosophical question about who's trumping what, and to make sure that no one is stepping on the toes of council, which sets that parameter.
I would say then that, yeah, from the perspective of respecting council's decision and allowing them to do what they're elected to do, it does make sense that they shouldn't be able to be trumped by like a committee or commission kind of below them. It is hard as a person wanting to be empathetic, especially like nowadays. I know things are more expensive, and it's not always easy, but that being said, like, you know, we have the standards are the standards, and so maybe that needs to change, but if we're wanting to enforce what they are, then there's no point of having them if we're not gonna do that. So that does, I think that what you guys are saying, I think is very logical.
Well, and I think you can build standards to be flexible and responsive too, so.
Sure.
They can be prescriptive but have option-based, so maybe not everyone is stuck having to do a brick exterior, which is costly. They're good, but not getting to like vinyl per se. But having that intermediate, so it still meets a design expectation, but has some cost fluctuation built into it. That there's a way to allow that flexibility. We're meeting people where they're at, but not watering it down enough to then you question, why do we even have these? Because if they're not gonna be enforced, it's
So
not
just to elaborate on what you were just talking about, so like kind of creating like a flow chart tree essentially for like different standards rather than, does that make sense?
So we have a graph that Claire, Jacob and I prepared that would show what the materials, like it'll say, okay, maybe you can have vinyl. Vinyl, for the record, too, is not terrible. There's different types of vinyl. You can get thicker ones that are, you know, much more, the way they attach, the way they hold, like, there's ways around that, but like for you know, purposes of economies, like if we wanted to do a material that was more affordable, we can show pictures of what that looks like, what we're talking about, so they can see that, oh, I can still have a very nice building, and maybe do it in a more affordable manner, to provide for the options that, you know, that the Gibbons group was talking about. We did consider that, I think that could be a possibility.
So there is one of these, you know, graph flowchart style,
It would be imagery, yeah, in a table. So
Okay.
like masonry, concrete, you know, or masonry, and then you have like different types of vinyl, and you have different types of hardy, or whatever the case may be. And then you have like 10 or 12 different options.
Cool. I was not aware of the existence of,
And then-
We just-
Yeah, there's 6 different grades, 6 different grades of vinyl.
But that's very common too, to provide, the more menu of options that still get to the design intent you're looking for, the more flexible it is, and the easier it is to implement. And I think that's where, I think that's good to know that city staff is looking at some alternative paths to doing that. We see that throughout practice, that you can still be prescriptive with options. Still gives the ability, some flexibility within it built. Any other thoughts on this question?
Well, with that in mind, I think I am leaning a little more towards abolishing the waiver, because of the everything that's been said about how it interacts with council decisions. I think that's, now that it's been discussed some and I've had some time to process it, I think that's where I've landed on that, so.
And this is something that what we can do is, we're not quite to like the public review draft portion of the code yet. So we could definitely work with city staff to make some modifications, and something can get brought back to planning commission.
So would it be to limit how many waivers are presented?
There's a
Is
few
that
ways
part
you
of-
can do it. We could, if the waiver was something that the city wanted to maintain, we could limit the amount of waivers, we could limit what the waiver covers by refining the findings and the criteria, or the waiver could get eliminated completely. So there's a few routes to take, and
The waiver could apply maybe to not materials, but could apply to massing or articulation. We could be very specific as to the applicability of the waivers.
but nothing's been decided on yet. This is
Yeah,
something that
just-
was flagged that we at least wanted to bring before the planning commission before it was worked on further. To get your thoughts and ideas. Okay. There is a missing component within chapter 1210. It doesn't touch on the I-1 and I-2 zoning districts. So it doesn't actually have any design or building architectural standards for industrial development. So the question there's no right or wrong. The question we have for planning commission is, should there be building and architectural standards that apply to the I-1 and I-2 zoning districts, similar to that of the commercial, the mixed use, the residential, where we get into materials, we get into site orientation. Jacob, I don't know if you wanna add into this. I know that from the economic development front, industrial development is unique. It's not like commercial. Did you wanna throw some 2 cents in before we open it up to the planning commission?
Yeah, no, certainly. You know, I wasn't around in 2018 at the last major development code update or a lot of the history thereof. Obviously, you go back to turn of the century, 1900s, you know, we had a lot of paper mills, a lot of the intro to the steel mills. You know, they had gorgeous administrative buildings. Honestly, it's a shame a lot of them ended up getting torn down. You know, the columns, the massing, a lot of really pretty elements, Curtis Street, Wyckoff, Charles. Unfortunately, the economy wasn't there anymore and a lot of them got torn down. However, you know, through the years, especially in the steel industry, but to an extent, a lot of the paper mills and stuff, it's not say delineated, but a lot of them are a little bit more of the prefabricated industrial development. So to what extent, on that end of it, being an industrial community, do you deviate from that, or do you set some sort of baseline standards that you wish, even on the industrial front, to be met? Obviously, I-1 as an industrial park district, soon to be light industrial district, maybe that's a little bit different than I-2, heavy industrial. But really just teasing that out. And then two, comparisons between the B3 and the BCF districts, right? Because both of those, especially as we look at the development code update, they have some light industrial manufacturing flares to them as well. So how does the architectural elements there compare?
And this could be anything from facade treatments. I mean, a lot of industrial developments are like tilt-up development, but you can have facade treatments that doesn't have that tilt-up concrete look to them. We drove by a few last year that had some really good exterior treatments done. So it's possible. It's just not regulated at the moment.
And I think not necessarily a fear, but a consideration that we've talked about internally is, do we want to apply standards to our industrial base? Is that a desire that we want to apply standards to a really big job-serving aspect of this community? And that's kind of our initial question, is kind of, if we are okay with applying standards, then also what on that spectrum how far do we want to go? So, sorry.
For clarity, I guess, when we're talking the buildings, are we talking like literally anything? So I guess, for me, when I hear industrial, I'm immediately picturing like a factory.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess also, I didn't think of, like more like administrative buildings within. I mean, I'm assuming then there would be differentiation between, within that too. It's not just everything every building in here has to fit this. Is that correct? Or
We could provide that breakdown.
Okay.
So just a little more context, even before really getting to the crux there of whether or not we would have architectural standards for I1 or I2. I know even at the staff level a couple months ago, we had the conversation of, smaller contractor offices, or if it's an office use larger than, say, 1,000 square feet, that you would have some level of commercial architectural standards applied. Rather than just, a 30,000 square foot office building, but it's a pre-engineered steel barn, right? To what extent do you hold those standards?
So in that instance, this is like that type of office structure that you're referencing is within an industrial zone, though?
It would be within the industrial zone, but
Like
it would
their
be a
administrative-
use, it would be it's a different use than manufacturing indoors or
Sure.
manufacturing heavy.
I mean, that seems, I can see some logic in that.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely think that spaces that are built for humans, not actively doing manufacturing spaces, they should have some, design standards to them in line with other office building. I'm sure, I don't know all the zoning districts right off the dome, but I'm sure that there are business office oriented ones that have standards that would probably match up pretty closely. So definitely for administrative buildings. I mean, as far as trying to do that for the actual buildings that hold industry, it's kind of like putting lipstick on a pig. But curious to see what everybody else think about that.
I think for the industrial, I think you have to be competitive with your neighbors too, more so than you do with residential, because they can go other places.
And I mean, from the economic development perspective, historically, that has always been kind of our marketing niche on that, right? Was that, because of the opportunity there from an elements. But certainly as we look at the code update, how does that reflect? How do you delineate that? Again, compare and contrast I2, which is where Cleveland Cliffs, the steel mill is, compared to BCF, which is the research center on Union, right? BCF, architectural elements, greenscaping, suburban environment, whereas the I2 current doesn't really have those sort of features. So you compare and contrast there as to, what the zoning district is and how it looks.
Anybody else have anything to contribute?
I would think that some architectural standards for I1 would be an appropriate, it's like we said, what do we want even that area, which would probably be on the outskirts of an I2 factory, presumably, does have some there is some aesthetic needs there and some standardization. So yeah, I mean, do Hamilton and any of the other locales, how are they dealing with I-1? Do you know? Anybody? I don't know.
Want me to speak to that?
Yeah.
I can speak to that, okay. Yeah, so I can tell you in Hamilton, so Hamilton's very much like Middletown, like, so when you go into Hamilton, first thing you see is some of their I-2. When you come into Middletown, that is what people are gonna see, first impression.
Yeah.
Right, so you do want something, they do. They have some standards, however, they're not aggressive, right? And I don't know that we, going along with, I'm sorry,
Roger.
I'm sorry. With Roger's comment, I do agree that I think, you know, there should be some standard to bring it up a little bit, to, you know, you can make it look, it can still be industrial, but industrial that doesn't have to look ugly. Does that make sense?
What's the difference between I-1 and I-2? Since I
The
don't know the
uses,
terminology.
one could be like really heavy advanced manufacturing with,
So, for example, I-2, you know, that's chemical plant, all the chemical plants on Yankee, that's I-2 industrial. The main steel mill on Wyckoff, that's heavy industrial. Trying to think of some other areas there on that I-2. Pack Worldwide, further down on Cincinnati Dayton Road, those are all I-2 properties. So to that point, heavy manufacturing, maybe it has outdoor yards, outdoor storage, chemical and caustic uses. That's all in I-2. Verity Parkway, where the original mill was, the paperboard site, that's all I-2 zoning. I-1 zoning up around Hook Drive by the airport. Most of that industrial property there by the airport is all I-1. So smaller uses, doesn't have as much of those outdoor components, doesn't allow the caustic or hazardous or chemical emissions.
It still allows a light manufacturing, but I-1 also allows office incorporated into it.
Yeah, I-1 I think has a little bit more of that mix. Trying to think of some other areas off the rip there on that I-1.
essentially what they,
No.
essentially what they do is they'll take raw materials and melt them down or turn them into something that they can market and stuff. Right, it's like beams, things of that nature. I don't know if that's what we have here, but that's essentially what they're taking raw materials and turning it into something,
Okay.
which takes a lot of heavy machinery, things of that nature that give off the combustions that Middletown does have. So can we do something like, if somebody wants to come in and do that, then can we change that to look a little bit more appealing? Like, I believe we could, you know, but be mindful on those considerations, there's also big dollars. So do we want to deter these businesses? I don't know that we want to deter and make them super aggressive. We just want it to look clean.
Another compelling argument, just a thought that I had, would it maybe be a little more prudent to redo the landscaping and not that we've gone that far, but landscaping standards for I-1 and I-2 to make it, compel them to, turn areas of lawn into like, you know, wildflowers or something like that to increase the aesthetic value without necessarily putting, and ecological value without necessarily putting that burden, on them, because as Jacob said, that is one of the appeals of coming to Middletown is it's a little cheaper to set up shop.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, it sounds like work within the existing structure and standards that are already established, is there a way to just apply them more specifically to industrial? Is that kind of what you're asking, as
Yeah.
opposed to creating a new suite?
Yeah.
Certainly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it could also be like, let's say we do increase the standards, create standards for I-2, right? And maybe it could be something that is only like for new development, and there could be a certain element of like a grandfathered in status. You know, that's not, it's just an idea. I don't know exactly how I feel about it, but it's just an option on the table, grandfathering in maybe some businesses that we might scare away by doing that, but
Have you seen the in the road? Do you know where DeKunik
Yeah.
is and Worthington Steel? Those are heavy industrial I-2, I-1 type things. Top of Garber Road.
you know where that speedway is, and there's that
Yeah,
road.
but you know that's a really small scale in compared to what Middletown is. Middletown is far larger, but if you can envision like the way when you drive up, it's open, it's green, the parking, all the other stuff is tucked behind. Like those kinds of things we could do. It doesn't change their operation, it just changes the way it looks.
And I
We
think
also
there's,
have some mounds that are built up
Correct.
for screening, yep.
and your landscaping standards right now have some pretty robust buffering standards. Having, codes is what we do, I remember looking at, wow, yes, they're very, I think there's ways to expand it, but probably not by much, cause they're pretty prescriptive.
Mhm.
But I do think that there is the opportunity here to have some, as Tom had touched on, a light touch of architectural standards applied to the industrial zones. Not to deter economic development to come in, but just so that it fits more within the fabric as it is now in Middletown. And I mean, the industrial uses are constantly evolving, and they have over the past 50, 60 years. So trying to just keep up with that, I think is a good thing. But this is something we wanted to float by all of you. And if it sounds like there is some consideration here to include something. And so what we can do, we can work with city staff to draft some standards and then bring them back for review.
If there are examples, as now we've kind of dropped this seed in your brains, that you think about, or if you drive by an industrial building that you think emulates kind of a successful architecture, or maybe some that don't, those would be beneficial to provide to city staff so they can provide those to us, and we can always craft and kind of pick out some certain standards to articulate and spell out if we can get some real world examples.
Well, the DeCunic example, I think that's a pretty good example where, it's mounted in the front, it's got screening, most of the stuff is on the way back. Definitely one that is like a bad example is the entrance into Suncoke off of Yankee. It's just right up there. It's straight into a parking lot, you can just see all the way back, yeah, so that's one and one right there.
Perfect.
Noted.
And
If anybody else
That's
is
great. Any other examples you can think of?
Well, I didn't come here today to talk about the paperboard site, but I still don't see how you justify the storing of the material where you do when you're talking about some of the things that you're talking about today, which, visually, no matter how you look at it, it's not visually pleasing. It's on a main thoroughfare through the city from Franklin to Hamilton, so you're gonna get traffic through there every day. So that's one of the reasons why I just could never understand the justification of keeping that material on that site. Even if you do go through and grade and see the remaining flat portion of that and leave that material there, you're still not, in my opinion, doing the neighborhood a favor.
Right.
Because we're still looking at that and we're still subjected to the dust and debris that comes off of that every day. Like I said, I'm all for building the Middletown that we all wanna see. And I've tried to present some ideas, having lived abroad and having lived in multiple cities, to try to bring some ideas that would help to initiate that. Because that main thoroughfare is lacking a lot, where it could be really built up. I even wonder how you're going to present redoing the Manchester when you haven't really done a whole lot of building on this side of town. What is gonna be the real appeal to get someone to spend that kind of money for a condo when you haven't built the area around it to offer them something to look forward to buying this house?
There's nothing to attract.
Yeah,
Entertain.
not much at all.
Mhm.
So that's a big concern. I wanna see the houses, the condos built. I wanna see this side of town, brought up to date. But, let's be smart about it and have more forward thinking as to how you're gonna make that happen versus just, giving bits and pieces. Yes, it's a good idea to have housing presented where you're talking about, because that solves two problems, two buildings that's been a headache for a long time.
Right.
So we definitely wanna see that happen, but we also wanna see the surrounding area grow with it.
Mhm.
You can't just put something new over here and say, hey, we got a new house over here. You know, you have to have something appealing to want people to want to even invest in those houses in this neighborhood.
No, you're not wrong.
And, yeah, I definitely agree that the way that the city has treated the paperboard site, a little bit shameful. However, I don't think this specific meeting is talking about what we can do about that. But, yeah, I definitely.
Well, like I said, I didn't come here today to
Mhm.
talk about that per
Mhm.
se, but I could see how some of these rules and regulations that you're putting forward could affect
Mhm.
that issue.
Mhm.
But I did not come here for that today.
No, and the development code does have the ability to impact those types of uses, how they're integrated within a community, how they're screened. So yes, the development code in general, it may not cover that site specifically based on its history, but other areas it can affect, which we don't wanna repeat necessarily what's going on. So.
There's still room for correction.
There
Yeah.
are, there are,
You know, be-
there are, it's
being
outside
here and
of
making
the
your
purview
point.
of the code, I have no control
Yeah.
over that
I
site.
understand, I understand.
And, you know, being here and voicing that and like being able to find where exactly in the code that you can use to, you know, poke them about this and, you know, get that's
Well,
valuable in its own right.
That's
but-
what brought the thoughts
Yeah.
to my head. Like I said,
Mhm.
I did not come here for that today.
Mhm.
And that's where I think the question here, this question number 2, kind of leans into what you're talking about.
Exactly.
It does start to
Exactly.
address that,
Mhm.
and it's kind of at that base level
Okay.
to start to have that conversation. And that conversation will go beyond planning commission. I mean,
Exactly.
this will go forward to council.
Mhm.
There's more public engagement planned as part of this effort too, so.
Exactly, because I wanna see the city of Middletown thrive, I wanna see it, you know, grow. And right
Mhm.
now, it's just stagnated, and I don't know that anybody really knows how to turn that around. But I definitely wanna see the city grow.
From a development perspective, we think we're really on the right track with a lot of these modifications that we're making. I think it's really gonna take some time to see how those translate. But collectively, between city staff and the consultant team, we're really excited about a lot of these opportunities that we've presented to you and that we'll present in a more complete. I think it's hard to see all these different pieces of how they relate to each other when we bring them to you in chunks. When we have this complete draft, I think it'll paint a better picture.
Okay.
But yeah, no, this is great feedback.
So we're moving on to the next question.
Yes, please.
So-
Anybody else have anything?
The next question, this kind of came up through review, if the city should consider requiring more sustainability features. And I'm gonna highlight this, in multi-unit. There's a terminology change, a shift that's happening in this code update, going from when we call like single-family, multi-family, now categorizing it as the product, not the inhabitants of the unit. So we're shifting the term now to multi-unit, single unit, just focusing on the development type itself. So you won't see single-family, multi-family, it'll be single-unit, multi-unit development, so just wanna call that out. But should the city consider requiring more sustainability features in multi-unit developments that focus on energy efficiency or other benefits to the environment? I know this is very open-ended question, but this is something we just wanted to toss out. You can, just like you can regulate massing and articulation on a building, you can require orientation on a site. You can require a whole host of things. No right or wrong whether the city does that or not, but something we at least wanted to pose to the planning commission.
Shouldn't it bring it into the 21st century and not just think we're gonna keep using coal for everything? So should we maybe look at some eco standards or some, yeah.
Are there currently any
Not in there at the moment, no.
So,
But
Just
you,
there.
I was gonna say, one of the things that kind of popped in my mind, while you were saying about that is like having standards for, at the very least, housing, to have a part of the roof that is south facing so that solar panels, should the homeowner choose to install them, has the capability to maximize their solar output. I feel like that's something that, it was the first thing to pop into my mind. I mean, this is something that, like, I've spent a fair amount of time researching, so it's kind of like, what exactly are you proposing? Or is that something more like you want our feedback on what direction to look into, and then you can bring us options, or?
Yeah, I
or
think
what
it's,
is it?
yeah, I think it's a little mix of both. I think we're trying to get a temperature.
Mhm.
What gauge the temperature? What is the acceptance of mandating further kind of design criteria or facilities potentially on a site that,
Mhm.
while in theory are bettering the environment, making it more, in some cases if we're looking at solar, more like an energy independent site.
Mhm.
But we also want to balance that with its cost implications. And in some cases, those can be political in some environments and in some jurisdictions. So I think that's where we kind of wanted to just start. Is there a underlying feeling that development should be incorporating more sustainable features as a base minimum?
I'm gonna ask, is there a strong initiative for solar in Middletown right now? Cause where I live, they used to beat the door down. And I've gotten very little, interaction from anyone asking to even switch to solar. So I was just wondering what the temperature was like for that.
2022, 2023, we had a couple initiatives, a couple of different entities approached the city over some underutilized or vacant land, for solar fields. I know the EV chargers, I wanna say that was 2024, the city did implement that, start working through that grant process, to try to get some of that electric vehicle, charging ports. I would say over the last 18 months, we really haven't gotten a lot of outreach from companies, but again, maybe that's more of a national trend, and as federal politics shifts, so too does, some of these energy initiatives, but, yeah, I mean, 3-4 years ago, I would say a couple of companies a year would reach out saying, hey, you're not utilizing the old city landfill, hey, there's another vacant underutilized area that maybe we could put solar panels.
But there hasn't been a real strong initiative for residents to switch over.
I haven't personally seen anything, I mean,
A lot of the tax credits have gone away,
Yeah.
so I think that has a lot to do with it.
Okay,
well, and
that
there-
makes sense.
Yeah, so property assessed clean energy, PACE financing, which is a development tool for a lot of mixed use or commercial developments. It's something that the city does have. We have our own energy savings improvement district. However, just because of the way that financing tool and the, incentive to go green, how that's shifted, it hasn't been heavily, I haven't seen any company really aggressively pursue it in the last 5 years. So, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So are we also talking in the realm of like insulation standards? I can't remember what the term is, but what the R value
standard.
of the heat exchange, we talking in the realm of that too?
That
or-
gets.
That
I
gets a
think-
little complicated.
And that gets a little more technical into like the building
Mhm.
construction
Yeah.
aspect of it. It's
Mhm.
more, as opposed to like the site design, building
Mhm.
articulation, kind of where
Mhm.
where are structures oriented, how do they relate to each other, and what
Mhm.
kind of, what do they look like from the exterior, not necessarily maybe kind of internal functioning, that would be more of like a building.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that, cause like I said, I'm kind of like, I'm red on the subject, it's one of my passions, but as far as like trying to apply that to zoning itself is not something that I have connected the dots quite fully on, so, I mean, personally, if you have things that you see that you think would be a good fit for adding, standards for, I'm open to hearing them, but I would need something more concretely suggested rather than just like, yes, I am open to it, I don't know about.
And I just wanna make clear, it's not, asking this question is not necessarily that city staff and the consult team are advocating to include these. It's just a topic of discussion to take the temperature if it's something that the city would want to include. There are lots of examples across the United States where sustainability factors are included into design or into functions on a site. I mean, to the extreme of some areas require rain catchment on your property, so you use the water for landscaping.
Oh, wow.
So, I'm not saying that's applicable here, but that just shows you, that is a sustainability consideration where single-family development has to include that type of system where it catches gutter runoff on your home. So, there are things like that, from a design perspective, that could be included to fit here if there's the appetite for it. And then Michael made a really good point. Those have cost implications too. We were just talking about cost implications of what if we're requiring certain materials on the outside. Once you add more requirements to development, it is gonna drive up cost. That's important to some communities and not as important to others. So this is just the open dialogue we wanted to have with all of you. I didn't know if there was any experience that you've had from surrounding jurisdictions, if they've even kind of gotten to this level of incorporating sustainability factors.
I have, but it's negative. It's not.
Would you mind sharing that?
Well, it's just become cost prohibitive. So on the more, you've spoken to it pretty much already with the requirements that are laid out on top of already the building costs, the material costs, and then you add another layer of, this. And then if you're gonna talk about positioning the homes a certain way, on a zoning application, that severely limits how they can construct a road or a water line or, things of that nature. And so it does, though the initiative is, it's noteworthy, it's very honorable, but I think it needs to get massaged a little bit more in order to make it effective, as effective as people think it can, because it does have potential, but right now I think it becomes more prohibitive than it does.
I just worry, like you said too, it is political matter whether you want it to be or not. And I just don't know if we want any potential, blowback of any response to that. It's just being real of this part of the country, I think, there could be potential for that. Is there any way of, if we wanted to, if this is something that, the city wants to see more of an initiative for, is there things of like incentives that could be done instead of being required? That would be outside of the code, I guess, right?
So he spoke to PACE, and PACE is an incentive that, like, if somebody wants to do something, there's financial opportunities to do that. The problem with PACE is it's very, very cumbersome and heavy on the administrative side. And they don't want to, you can speak to that better than I can.
Part of the onset is you have to prove there's an energy efficiency through whatever improvements that you do. It's not just solar panels and windows like skylights, but it can also be, the R value, new insulation that could help do that energy reduction. But again, part of that too, I think when it first rolled out 15, 20 years ago, the financing was there, that it made sense for companies to look at it, because if the interest rate was 8%, but the financing for PACE was 4.5%, okay, I'll work this through property assessment. However, now with the interest rates, they're kind of comparable between the open market on PACE and what our interest rates are. So we just haven't seen that in uptick. Anecdotally as well, especially some of the larger employers in town, whether it's the paper companies or some of the even like the chemical companies, they almost enjoy that. Even though I'm not required to do this, my environmental contributions on how, most of our paper companies in town, it's almost 100% recycled paper that they're taking in. SD is a good example of that. Graphics packaging was recycled until they closed up. So some of those initiatives that they can also help speak to and build on.
Here's just another thought. So I did see that there was some revisements going on to like the open space credit for private developers, right? Could it be possible to, and this is probably a little cumbersome, but it's just an idea, to create an alternative or an additional credit that's focused on not just green space, but allowing space where a small residential scale, small community scale solar could be set up on on a parcel or on a site, there's always those corners that don't get developed. You know, obviously there needs to be some sort of regulation on how they're maintained and by whom and who they're owned by, but, just an idea. Is that something you guys have seen done in other municipalities, or am I just spitballing crazy here?
And these would be standalone.
Like, just small, you know, small scale solar that is focused not on supplying the 100% of the energy cost for homes, but like in a microgrid kind of system where parts of the grid retain relative amounts of autonomy from the larger grid and as far as their power input goes.
I see. I haven't dealt with the like almost like that grid electrification kind of plan through
Mhm.
zoning before.
Mhm.
My one thought would just come down to if we would be constructing these sorts of structures on a potentially vacant lot, my one concern are we okay with that being like a standalone allowed use on a vacant lot? And I'm not sure, at least in the tables that we've gone through, that standalone solar facilities or electric generation facilities would be something that would be allowed in some of our.
It's, and it may have even been updated lately. The one example I do have, going back 3 years ago, Summit Drive, the small office park area across from Middletown High School, because of the way the utilities and kind of the language of basically the power generation was there, it was permitted in an office park that you have all these smaller suburban style offices and then a large solar field, like right there in the center of it. So I think there was some angst there as to whether or not that was something people really wanted to see or wanted to continue to, how that shapes into the code and as a standalone use.
You know, personally, you know, I would prefer it to be on roofs first, but it was just an idea. I was thinking about reading over the open space, or the private space credit, earlier, and I just had an idea.
Any other thoughts? If not, we could move on to the next one. So the city is considering requiring multi-unit developments, this is specific to just to multi-units, to provide on-site amenities. Now, this doesn't necessarily have to do with open space requirements, but these are amenities that are to the benefit of residents that reside in those specific developments. And so we wanted to just take the planning commission's temperature. Is that something that should be a requirement? Should multi-unit developments that come in, let's say you have an apartment complex or a townhome development come in, should they have to provide recreation courts? Should they have to provide community spaces for residents? Or is that just an extra layer of additional standards that are unnecessary?
The thought process is, and we hear both sides of the argument, is that developers are going to develop products for their clientele, and if their clientele is gonna be oriented towards families, then they're gonna construct like a tot lot or a playground or something. If their clientele is gonna be more senior-oriented, then the amenities are gonna be more senior-oriented. And so the argument to be made against specifying amenities is we'll leave it up to the developer because they know who they're gonna be building for, their clientele. I think from the consultant or from the city planning perspective is, well, if we don't specify, then we might not get anything, and that is potentially an argument. And so there is a justification that could be made to at least specifying what amenities would be appropriate if you wanted to, or you take another side of the spectrum where you say you have to provide amenities, but we don't describe what those are. Some jurisdictions, they list what amenities are appropriate, how many of each, depending on the amount of units. That's pretty prescriptive. Doesn't really allow too much room for flexibility. But there's other sides of that spectrum where it just requires an amenity of some sort. It defines kind of what an amenity might be, some illustrative examples in the definitions portion of the code, and then we really just rely on the developer to hopefully provide something that is appropriate.
Personally, I think the private sector should dictate what amenities go into a development. You said it right from the beginning, I think. A developer, and we all know these, they come before us, they're gonna develop property that's gonna have amenities that are gonna attract the residents that they want. I'm not gonna go to necessarily to a development that has a swimming pool, and other outside amenities maybe, but I might, at my age, clubhouse, yeah, maybe that's someplace where the developer is gonna attract me by putting it there. I just think that government's intrusion into these decisions by the private sector is a little more imposing, is my opinion.
I agree with that.
I hear you. I'm leaning towards
Of course, pickleball.
non-prescriptive requirements, but I don't feel super strongly on it either way.
There's flexibility in it though. You know, when they, if let's say they present, because there's a scenario where, you know, a developer can come in and say, yeah, we have like these high-end, you know, apartments or condos, whatever, units, but maybe they're just putting in a dog park and they're offering garages. Okay, like those are amenities and those are desirable amenities and they attract a certain group. But what about the other demographics and what about the setting the standard for that area and developments around that? Well, each one of these is gonna have an HOA. You can bake a requirement in the HOA or the development agreement. There's other ways, guys.
You saying other
It could-
than having it in the code?
Yeah, so you leave it open to free markets, which I think you do. But let's say something comes before you that's, you know, second rate. Well, we want, bring your A game, send it back.
And we have that prerogative that when a planned development is presented to,
Well, what if they come in and the underlying, and the zoning as is not a PD,
okay,
right? So they're coming in at multi-unit zoning, R4, and R4 says, you know, you need to have an amenity, but it's to your discretion. Well, then they come back and they say, well, we just want a dog park, or we just want a garage, you know, a couple garages, or something like that. You know, well, we have on-site mail, stuff that's like, dude, this is a given, you're supposed to be doing it anyway, okay? So, bring your game, and if they don't, then we can, each one of these will come with a development agreement too. And that development agreement's gonna stipulate what the HOA is to do, and thou shalt, boom, 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 boom. Well, we can also incorporate something there that says, we would like a pickleball court. You know, we'd like you to put it here, maybe in conjunction with the dog park. Some of the new things that are coming out, they have on-site car washes. You know, that's a hot ticket. Not a really big amenable one, but a hot ticket. Pools, most of these developers will already do that anyway because they're going after the people, the clientele that wants that. So.
I guess, sorry to interrupt.
No.
So my question, I guess, is, I'm hearing where some of you guys are coming from on this, but if our standard and what we want to see them bring is to have these anyway, what's the difference between having it codified versus we're gonna essentially be enforcing it as if it's codified? If it's something that we want to see and are going to be pushing for, I'd rather have something codified rather than it being individual discretion, and then there's less, to me, there's less teeth maybe isn't the right word, but like, if I can say these are our hard rules for and expectations for the city versus, I might, if I'm a developer, I'm not really in that field, but I gotta imagine it'd be kind of more annoying to have just this board or whatever telling me this is what you want versus this is what's written down, so if I'm coming into this already, that's what I want.
Well,
Legitimizes it.
At pre-app, we give them guidance.
Legitimizes it.
At pre-app, we give them guidance anyway and saying, hey, we strongly recommend that you include X, Y, and Z. Is there going to be a pool? Well, we didn't really plan, well, you might wanna consider that. And I'll go back to the drawing board. The difference between having, you know, compelling them to do it and then doing it on their own is the quality that you'll get along the way. If it's their idea, from the jump, then it's gonna be something that they bake in that they wanna do all the way down. You know, is there a possibility that won't happen? I've not seen it. So I think the odds are in our favor. But in the event that it doesn't happen, like there's concessions and things that we can do.
Do you want the same amenities in every area, right? I mean, if it is a, multi-unit development in the downtown, do we want that development to have a movie theater? When we prefer that clientele then to be leaving and to enjoy the walkability of that? To get to things like the Sword, or if it's, if it's an infill development that's multi-unit in the urban core, do you truly want things like a car wash or a swimming pool or something like that? So, I mean, to what extent do you want the amenities in the different, areas of the development?
One thing that you could require, I think, though, that this just came to my mind, that we should be doing anyway, is pedestrian access. To where there's trails connecting every single neighborhood that take you to downtown, all the way to town mall, or whatever the case is. That
That's part of the Middletown master plan that has not been implemented or enforced in any way.
But that's amenity that always comes up, because, that they don't necessarily wanna do that. Well, I'll just put in a 5-foot sidewalk and call it good. No, we want 12-foot asphalt pathway the whole way of your frontage.
Something that I've been chewing on while the discussion's been going on is that what if it was dependent on how many units are planned to be constructed, right? Because I think of like the Emerald Villas, right, where that's like infill development. It's the development is already pretty much using all of the space that it can. There's not really room to fit an amenity on there. But then it's kind of like choosing a number, like if you have more than like 15 units, it's just arbitrary. So, like that, like I said, I've been chewing on it. Maybe something worth discussing is figuring out I hate to use the term sliding scale, but figuring out maybe larger developments should be compelled to have some amenities within and throughout, while smaller scale, especially infill development, isn't subject to the same standards because they are developments that are trying to fill different niches, right? Does that make sense?
Almost, as opposed to specifying the specific amenities, just put a minimum amount of amenities that would be provided per unit.
Or square footage of recreational area, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
There's different ways to go.
On the
about it.
recreational part, we have that in the form of our open space.
Mhm.
So that is there already, and that's what developers try to piggyback on when they do like detention ponds. Well, you can put a bench there and look over the pretty sight.
No.
Yeah, exactly.
Is there anything that we want, that we definitely want? Is there any, we mentioned walkways, public walkways. Is there anything that we definitely want to include? I know we're trying not to get too prescriptive, so we can be.
Trails and pedestrian access, I think that's not even like an amenity per se, that's just like basic site flow and infrastructure.
I agree.
Personally.
It's kind of a shame that it is.
I think it needs to be a standard of Middletown. Middletown's policy is that if you're gonna develop here, you put in a pathway. That's a given.
I just don't think that prescribing the amenities, I think that's the problem. I think that I don't know what number this should be, but over a certain amount of units or square footage or what have you, that you are compelled to provide from a list of maybe not even a list, but just amenities that aren't shelters for your car or a garage or like the mailbox at the front, right? Or something like that. It has to be those. I feel like those are technically amenities, but they're not really truly amenities in any sense of the connotation of the word, But that all just gets pretty subjective pretty fast. And I know objectivity is one of the focuses here, so.
What's the requirement, this isn't the open space, I don't think, but, so correct me if I'm wrong. You have to pay into, for, the park money.
Impact fee?
Mhm.
Yeah, that's not, is that part of the open space or is that something separate? Cause with that one, it's like.
Depends how it's used. Yeah.
Sure, cause it's like if you provide enough park space, then you offset some of, is that how that works? Can you
So
remind me?
impact fees are typically supposed to go to the impact that the development has on the system,
Sure.
right? Doesn't always work out that way. Sometimes it goes to a big pot of money and you just use it where you use it, you know? But typically it's supposed to, yeah, that impact per unit, so I forget what it is, like.
$500
$500 a unit. Yeah, then we go to that development to build up, or not even that development, maybe a park in the area.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And build that
Yeah,
up.
they made a waiver, some, depending upon how large their open spaces
There
or
is a-
parkland, there's a offset.
I mean, could that be
So, are we
something
talking-
that is like, I mean, cause some of these amenities that we wanna see are already kind of baked into that, I guess, right? Like, do some of these fall into, like, does a barbecue area
Counts as open
fit
space
within
or?
that kind of criteria?
Well, you could,
For
you could,
park
I mean,
impact?
you could, because you have the open space, so they're gonna dedicate a huge green field where you can play football, or the kids
Sure.
can go recreate. Well, in there, they're gonna decide, now they want to put a fire pit,
Yeah.
you know, or something like that. I mean, then it would qualify.
Does any other municipalities say, or provide in their code, you'll provide X number of square feet per X number of residents for resident benefit area? So like, just anything, it could be anything that the market, you think the market demands as a developer, but it has to be there. Does anybody do that?
I haven't seen them.
I would say I know, because I think from an implementation standpoint, it becomes hard to enforce and interpret that consistently and apply that consistently, at least from like the city planning.
What if we
perspective.
said for an apartment complex or a multi-unit, we said, well, let me think about this for a second. X amount of space cannot be for apartments. Do what you want with it, but it's not gonna be apartments. They'll try to maximize their value with
Yeah.
squeezing as many people as they can, as many units as they can. So that way we wouldn't be saying, there's no way to argue that.
Yeah.
If you put an apartment there, that's out of bounds, it has to be something other than that, and you determine as the developer what the market is.
So that's a good point. We do that, that's what, the way it's written out right now. So you'll have a site and you'll look at the topography. Well, I got contours over here and I can't put a structure there, so that's gonna be my informal open space where my detention, my stormwater goes. Right, so that's that. But then what they'll do is they'll have the formal open space, like over here where they have some amenities, and they'll put a walking path around it. Kind of thing, is what I've seen.
Can we
But-
also, oh, sorry.
No, sorry, and I don't know if that answers your question, but they do, we require a percentage of formal and informal space, and then after you've decided how you wanna do that, now you can build your structures.
Were you gonna say something, Will? No?
If that's the way the code is now, I would support that. I don't think that works.
And leave it open to them to decide, okay, here's how we wanna construct it, cause that's a lot of times, we don't, just from a matter of practice, like, the development department doesn't wanna get in the habit of dictating how stuff is to get built, because we want creativity. We want diversity, we want different things, we want them to bring their ideas of what they've seen be successful elsewhere. So, they'll do that, and then once they do that, now we'll pick it apart and meet our standards.
When it's, I mean, so it says the city's considering, so this is, what's some of the, have there been conversations already of like, were there certain types of amenities even maybe that's been tossed around that the city, like city staff wants to see more of, or like, where is this maybe kinda coming from?
No, it was something that just wasn't covered.
I see.
And,
Okay.
I mean, there are typical amenities that you see within multi-unit developments. There's newer ones. I haven't heard of the car wash one. I've heard of like on-site dog wash and dog pet things, so car wash is a new one.
It was
But
Monroe's doing that.
just a discussion of is that even something that the city would want to consider doing, or let the market drive it itself?
Gotcha.
gonna say, I personally have grown up when I was younger living in apartments and whatnot. And I think we should just kind of let the market dictate it, because what I'm worried on is like where I live at, my mortgage and taxes is only $827. I have a house. And so the way I look at it is that these apartments, people can barely afford it on top of it. So if we start putting like, well, you gotta have this and that, they're gonna put it into the rents.
Yeah.
Nobody's gonna come in and rent. I'll be honest with you, I got a cousin that lives in Middletown, pays $1,300 a month for a 2-bedroom apartment, and there's really not hardly any amenities in it. And I personally, I live in front of Sunset Park on Kenwood, so for me, we've invested in these parks. We have amenities, so maybe gear them towards that way. That's the way I look at it. I mean, you know, and some apartments had nicer pools. If your parents can afford it, some people just want an apartment just till they save up for that down payment for the house. Let's get, you know, think ideas like that. But I think once you start putting on, you gotta have this, they're gonna be like, okay, I'll raise the rent up $100. You gotta have that, raise it up $200, and then it gets just to a point of, yeah, you may have a pool, you may have some things, but yeah, you're paying $1,300-1,400 a month. You're not gonna buy a house, and then, you know, you're just gonna end up keep renting, or you're just gonna end up going somewhere else.
Right.
And I think it's just gonna open up more ideas for it, so.
Valid point.
Yeah.
So it's currently 5:55. Does anybody wanna do a short recess and recontinue in like 5-10 minutes? Use the bathroom, stretch legs, or do we wanna keep plowing through?
Sounds good to me.
I'm gonna have to leave anyway, but it's been informative. See you next time.
Thank you.
Okay,
Appreciate you
so
being here. Thank you.
let's take
Thank you
a
for being here.
10-minute
Motion, do we need
recess.
a motion to have
Motion.
recess, or?
I'll second.
Okay. All right, let's reconvene at, what, 6:05? Thank you guys for coming. Really appreciate it. Oh, you're staying? Okay, well, thank you for coming.
Because there's another meeting that we talked about going to over at the Triple Moon. It's got soil involved. And water, mostly soil.
But yeah, I mean, I just my cousin, he's
I got customers already got an apartment for $800.
But like,
And I'm
this
like,
one,
is
My
the
cousin is
parkland
trying to
dedication.
I feel bad, I was
On the
wondering.
parkland dedication, the grant,
He's trying to find
I'm gonna
something.
hand it over to you and Tom.
Oh,
There were a
that's
lot
what I'll
of
be
questions.
Yeah, there's no
Not so
way.
questions, there were conversations and comments that went back and forth between, I don't think this is where the city is still looking ahead. That goes beyond
I
the
moved away
development
for a
code.
long time, I came back.
And there weren't a lot of edits to that section,
I
that
only got
chapter.
like 3 years left in our house.
So
Wait, you live in California, right?
Yeah, in Sacramento.
And
And Oakland, my mother lived in Oakland, my
Tom made
parents
a
lived in
point to,
Oakland most of the time.
to.
Yeah.
That's right, I remember that.
That's where you got
You're
it.
like, I live in Sacramento, right?
So that's where I wanted to hand it back
I
to
love
staff
it.
on that
And
one
actually, I
to.
still
Yeah,
do
yeah.
Sacramento
Okay.
newsletter.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
I'm still finding out about the Jones and the new library.
But there's not
Just
actually-
around the airport.
There's actually not like a ton of
Crazy.
questions.
yeah, 'cause I have a lot to say on that.
The top
Crazy.
of the
Yes.
house.
They are doing
No, I mean,
so much.
this is the bulk of the
They're doing
questions.
so much. If you haven't been, I would say
No, I
it's.
haven't.
Yeah,
so-
it'll pick up.
Sacramento is evolving, it's changing from what it was like 20 years ago, even like 10 years
Yeah.
ago.
I mean,
We
Yeah.
just got approval for another, different from, if you've heard of like our high-speed rail debacle.
Oh, yeah,
But there's
yeah.
another.
Well, the Amtrak, I used to take the Amtrak. most
Amtrak, and then
times.
there's ACE. ACE is in the San Joaquin Valley, that is, we just got approval for a connection right into downtown. So now, so it's kind of
Like
like.
coming up from Stockton and
Yeah.
all of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To get people, oh yeah, cause actually a couple of my employees lived
yeah,
in Stockton.
growing as a kid,
Yeah.
They'd be like, oh, God.
So now they're putting like inner city
Years
stations
my
or
parents
a
first
downtown,
divorced, then we lived at
midtown.
Maple
Oh,
Ridge,
that's
so
good.
Aaron
Yeah.
Drive. So I've
Yeah, to
seen-
finally go south.
It's changing fast. You know where the Amtrak station is down the rail yards?
I let my mom do that.
They're breaking ground on a 20,000 seat soccer
The
stadium.
rent was a little lower.
That's
but
going in.
Really?
Yeah,
I mean, you.
Going towards west or
kind
coming?
of like hugging I-5.
Kind of
Oh,
towards
wow.
Garden Highway area.
And they're
Yeah,
building,
yeah.
like a 17-story Kaiser hospital coming in.
Another Kaiser?
Another Kaiser.
Kaiser owns California.
Yeah.
Kaiser Permanente
It does,
everywhere.
but oh my God, wait.
There's so many hospitals. I
It
don't know.
is. Well, see, I used Sutter, but a long
Oh,
time.
Sutter and Dignity
But my
and-
mother
Yeah.
used
My
Kaiser, so
in-laws are
that's why we're
debating
like,
on the one that moved,
Is it just-
like, to
is it just
retirement
Kaiser now?
community, and they live
There?
on Kenwood too.
Yeah, when I
So they
lived there, it was
keep
Kaiser
Kaiser
Permanente.
house.
Like,
So-
it was-
Oh, we still have Kaiser, but it's
Like I
like
said, I can
UC,
imagine. It looks nice.
Oh, UC has
UC
the one,
Davis,
yeah,
we have
yeah.
UC Davis, we have Shriners, we have
We looked at Otterbein.
Dignity,
When my wife was
Sutter,
work,
Kaiser,
I went-
Northwest. It's like it's one of the
Yeah.
top like medical.
Yeah, areas, especially
Yes.
probably too with UC Davis.
Oh, yeah.
And all the stuff that's
They're
come
building, and they're
in.
building a 17-story hospital, just UC Davis.
They got
Another one.
It's a trauma,
They got,
It's like all trauma.
it's a trauma 3 brain specialist, brain surgery specialist.
You got helipad.
Two helipads.
Yeah. I was gonna say, I mean, trauma's like, they bring the money.
Yeah, and I'm surprised then I guess the big, well, the older part of the VA and then the newer part of the VA.
Oh, yeah.
It's
Oh,
been
yeah.
Oakland, mostly on the San Francisco
Well,
side.
they built a new VA hospital in Stockton.
Well, do all that.
They finally finished it.
On the south end toward the airport.
Yeah, okay,
Mhm.
well, that's good to know. Some of our projects might come
It's,
through.
it's coming through, it's happening.
Finally finished, 2
I don't
years
know mine
later.
either.
Oh, yeah. Well, both my neighbors have now been hiring people, so this morning, that's what I was doing. So, see all that. I gotta-
On your way out?
Yeah, I gotta go do walk our neighborhood for a committee thing on Wednesday.
Nice.
Which one? Yeah, Central, yep. The Central Committee for Butler County, UOB, so yeah. Yeah, yeah, me and another guy, so I'm gonna go do that.
Who's contesting you?
It's David, I can't pronounce his last name. I don't know who he is, I've never met him.
Some people in your neighborhood.
Yeah, so I gotta go over and walk and do that, so. we'll see how it goes.
Good luck. Vote for me.
Vote for me. Yeah, I was gonna say I'll see you guys at the next meeting.
Yeah.
But I don't think we have from this month, or historical, we don't at least.
There's no.
No.
Yeah, there's nothing.
Not for the rest of April.
Yeah. See y'all
See ya.
later.
That, no, he's not on council, I'm not sure.
It's on historic commission.
Not on council, but.
And Board of Zoning Appeals.
He's busy, I guess.
Let's see, I'm still a Spurs fan, my
Oh.
mom said that.
Wow.
I told her last
He's
night,
running
they
for
said,
Central Committee.
Steph might be leaving.
He's aging out. Look, he's aging out.
Central Committee.
He's aging out.
She said, he better
It's a
not
committee,
leave. I said, he's old.
each precinct has a central committee person, and those people represent
Will be
the Butler County Republicans
But we're
at the
like,
Butler County functions for endorsements.
Oh, yeah, oh, yeah.
if he comes back.
Door knocking, for all of the campaign stuff.
Have you followed the BART housing development in Oakland that they're putting forward?
The way that works is that
Over at,
each like precinct person is part of the steering committee for the.
No, it is the West Oakland
Okay,
side near the
then yes.
port.
Like,
Yeah,
they-
and they're
There's
doing
a
like
separate
mixed
steering committee.
use.
Oh, there's a separate.
Yeah, there's
is
separate, comprised of
insane what they're building.
Central Committee people.
I mean, it's like 3 or 4 high rises
Is it
attached.
kinda close to you where the freeway?
I was on it one
Where
time.
it
when
buckled?
I got-
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah,
got
in
bounced,
89,
so I
yeah.
got- I was in the
Yeah,
middle of a
it's kind
trial
of,
and I couldn't go
it's
out
over,
and do
it's
what he's
before,
doing.
it's it's the last station before you go into the
That's
bay.
not the reason I lost.
Yep,
I
yep,
got carried.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep, West Oakland.
Yeah, they're doing a lot.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
We wanted to visit, but it's just too crazy for me.
Oh, we're back. Are we, oh no, we still have 2 minutes.
Yeah, we still got a minute unless we all just wanna get straight into it.
Let's go get into it.
Let's do it, let's do it.
We'll reconvene just a minute early.
Okay. So I promise, one more question on this topic. Not as many questions as we roll through the rest of this, so it's not gonna be, our last meeting, I think we were here, what, 4.5, 5
Yeah,
hours?
4.5, almost
It's not
5.
gonna be that today, I promise.
We had pizza.
It was a whole thing. So the last question, so as part of this draft, the city's considering requiring multi-unit and mixed-use development to comply with additional development and design standards. And these have to do with structured entries, so primary entries, whether you're on a corner, whether the access should be different for residential and commercial in a mixed-use development. What does that entry look like? So it gets into design criteria of the entry. what happens when we have a multi-story building adjacent to single family? And we're introducing step backs and setbacks. So you have the setbacks of a structure. Step backs mean that the development itself needs every floor as it goes up needs to step back further away from the property line, and it's to basically create less of an impact of having a taller structure adjacent to single family if that arises. This graphic here is an example. If you had a multi-story building, the upper floors would shrink in size to create less of that kind of onerous feeling on a lower development that would be adjacent to it. So it's trying to create a buffering effect between development, as well as design and kind of function criteria of the non-residential components of mixed-use development. So these are all things that are on the table that the city's considering that aren't in your current development code now. Now, I wanted to just touch on some of these. Do you think that those types of standards that we need to have those, are they necessary? Or has the way that development occurred in the community where these aren't necessarily considered, has it worked? Or do we need to go to this level? So this is just something to kind of flesh out and consider. These types of standards are not, they're not uncommon. They're not uncommon. These types of standards are pretty typical in more denser environments. You might find it within maybe downtown, not so much in more of the suburban as you get out toward the interstate. But they're not uncommon standards to have in a code, I guess is what I'll say. I don't know, Michael, if you want to add to some of this.
Does the idea of a step back make sense? I mean, I think we all know what a setback is. That's the physical location of the structure in relation to a line. I think the idea of a step back is you get a little more flexibility because you don't necessarily have to push, all things considered, you're not necessarily moving the structure as much as you're moving the vertical articulation after that. I'd say where some communities start to apply this standard is they apply a step back requirement if you're next to like single story development. Sometimes that trigger might be if you're building something over 3 stories, that 4th story has to be set back, or anything over 2 has to be kind of stepped back. The idea is it's going to create a little more flexibility and more options, and give an architect or a developer, I would say, yeah, a little more flexibility on that really delicate relationship between between height. And I think we're trying to focus on is really residential next to non-residential uses and the potential impacts that may arise from those. These very well could be applied to all development types, though, not just a non-residential next to a residential typology. But something that we are considering building in as another option for a developer, not necessarily, I mean, it would be a requirement, but I mean, the way that these would typically work is you could still achieve potentially the same standard if you moved your structure. This just allows, I would say, more site-specific design options.
So, just starting off on an easy one. Personally, I am for having different entry requirements for the commercial and the residential, and like what you called like the vertical mixed use earlier, because I feel like in one of those horizontal situations that's already kind of implied. So I definitely agree with that. I think I'm pro step back as well, especially in the case of like, you know, a multifamily or sorry, multi-unit is the new term that we're using. Multi-unit development when it's you know, butting up against either a one-story development or single unit housing, as you guys described. But I think that there are parts of town where, like especially downtown, where let's say we do have these step back requirements, right? And if somebody wanted to build a new building that, you know, aesthetically is in line with what already exists downtown, would that still be subject to the same step back requirements? Or since it would be in the design language of what's already previously built, is that something that could be theoretically waived? Would that go against what we just discussed earlier about the ARB waiver? Like, just some angles to consider there.
Well, I think you can have carve-outs. I mean, I think of the downtown as a little different. I think where this would be most applicable is if you went out a little bit further, where it had that transition line to single-family, single-unit development. If you're in the core of the downtown, I actually don't know if the step backs would be applied, and you can even write the standard in for that, because it's compatible with the adjacent development. It's that incompatibility is where we want to include standards like this. But there can be carve-outs, as you're discussing.
Yeah, that's kind of just the first things, I guess conflict points would be, you know, what I was thinking of. But, does anybody else have anything they wanna add?
The Manchester comes to mind for me, or what will go in its place. I think of Rossville Flats down in Hamilton, and I like the step back that they have. I think it looks better. I think it might create more opportunity or incentive for the developer to use different materials, which we have to be wary of. Like, I don't think we want a brick building and then vinyl on top. So that's something we'd have to watch out for. But it also, I don't know what they typically do with the space on the step backs, if anything, but I can envision there being patios out there, which would be nice.
Yeah, terrace patio.
Yeah, if it's an apartment building on Main Street, it would be nice if it was a nice apartment building with nice amenities like that. And it kind of, drawing on the discussion we just had about square footage for, you know, things for residents' benefit, and taking away from the square footage of residential space or units, it creates more opportunity for that, you know, nice places for the residents to hang out and have a beer like I would.
Yeah.
How often do you all see like
Or two.
step D, E, F in practice for multifamily construction or multi-unit construction?
I'm gonna say you're not gonna see this example in real life.
Okay.
This pyramid effect.
Yeah, this is, I think, really just to articulate how it looks, and it's, I mean, when we're looking at kind of where we're stepping these back in some cases, and this is just, I think these, our numbers are here just provided for example, but, yeah, I think you're gonna have design, what I see most often is you're gonna have like the first 2 stories are probably gonna be the same plane, and it's gonna be set back, and then you're gonna have 2 more stories. I mean, I think that's where I see that development going, but, I mean, I think we're talking about a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6-story building here. I don't think that you're not gonna see something that would look like this.
But step backs in multi-story buildings are common. If not step backs, they'll have kind of breaks or in the articulation, so they'll modulate the building to give that effect. Yeah, yeah. It's not, you're seeing that more now than just like a solid face.
Like maybe this building right behind, right here, where it's it doesn't step back, but it's got that break.
It does.
In it.
So what is the purpose though of it? Is it to separate delineation between transitions of zoning? Is that kind of what we're looking at?
Can be for, between zones, could be between development types.
But don't the buffer yards accomplish that?
They certainly could. I think this would be in addition, this would be in addition.
Yeah, it also affects if you've studied like daylight planes too. When a tall structure is gonna cast a shadow on the structure next to it. The intent of step backs is to create that daylight plane so that the shorter structure doesn't get overshadowed, literally.
Sunlight still comes in.
So sunlight still comes in. You'll actually find this in larger cities. Sometimes you'll have high-rise buildings. Do you wonder why they have angles? That's exactly why. It's because the lighting that comes down onto the street level, it's a design technique that they'll implement.
Do you see there's pushback from developers because that takes away square footage?
You can, yeah, and I think it depends how prescriptive or how rigorous the step back is. That's why Michael said, are you gonna see this like pyramid effect? No, I mean, what we've seen is maybe the 4th floor is step back 2 or 3 feet max. I mean, it's enough to start to give it a break, but you're not seeing like 10, 20 foot setbacks. At that point, you would lose all your livable square footage, and it wouldn't pencil.
Well, but or they could turn into rooftop decks, like
They
that's a
could.
hot ticket out here,
Mm-hmm.
so, I mean, yeah, all right.
Yeah, and that's the thing about the setback, like, minimum, right, is that they could still go with this, with the step backs and do more of a step back to allow for a larger, like patio, square foot, like theoretically.
And,
If desired.
and I mean, you could require it, you could require it over, that a step back has to be included for a structure that's 4 or more floors. So if a majority of development coming in is in the 3-story, you're not,
Yeah, not every building is losing that, yeah. I was thinking that, I think I would like to start to see that start after the 3rd floor, just cause I think it looks a little, obviously this is not meant to be like a super photorealistic, accurate depiction, but it does look a little funky starting on the 2nd.
Yeah, that's where my hang up was. I was like, I don't know how I feel about pyramid.
Yeah.
every building in the city is gonna be this
Yeah.
pyramid look.
You will have a terrace garden.
That's something we could.
It's a
I just
design
hope- I
aesthetic.
just hope they have that problem.
If the planning commission did wanna incorporate something like this, though, like one thing you could do is where it would apply. So if a developer decided, hey, I wanna occupy more space, and there's 100 feet, and that's pretty egregious, or 200 feet, to a single unit attached or detached home, then you could say, okay, this would apply where it's close. If there's like, I don't know, 200 feet, maybe it doesn't apply. You could put something in there to give some
Oh, I
options.
see what you mean. So
Because-
if it's within a certain,
Yeah, because-
distance of the plot line?
Because there's development standards too that said how high a structure goes, especially a multi-unit one. I mean, what is that, 50 feet? Well, not 50 feet, 40 feet? I don't know what the
Could be
height
around
requirement
there,
is. Yeah, I don't know what the height requirement is, but it's not that high. 40 feet's not that high. Right, so if you're gonna tear it on there, it'd be like one level that cuts back. Well, I could see a developer being like, oh, that's cool, cause then I'll just put patio or a deck or something up there, and then we accomplish both.
We've also
I
seen
mean-
it where if they don't do a step back, where then the setback increases.
Yeah.
So let's say you have a 50-foot setback, they don't wanna do step backs on their building, they don't wanna lose the square footage. Well, if they don't do the step back, then their setback increases by another 20 feet. So instead of 50, it's 70, and then that achieves the same thing,
Mhm.
because you pulled the building back away from the plot line.
And it's about keeping the light coming to the ground, to already existing, residences.
So there's
or
a
buildings.
few ways you can do it, and I think what Tom's talking about is another method too. But at least, again, taking the temperature of the commission to see where to land, and what we can do is take the feedback and come up with potential options to float by planning commission and eventually council.
To be clear too, we're talking with this just where it abuts single unit residential, correct?
I think that's what we've kind of played.
Or commercial, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I think where it would apply is how close is it to, your industrial stuff. This would be significantly beneficial, in proximity, because you'll have your buffer yards, they're good, but they're not that great. Throw up so many trees and you're so much far apart, well, you still have noise and distance, because some of these things are 24-hour operations, well, do you wanna?
So
That doesn't have anything to do
suggesting
with it,
adding
but-
industrial to the list of.
Is that what you're proposing, or are you just talking next to residential? Are you talking next to all different types? Because I thought it was transitions to zoning.
So
Just in
right,
general.
I mean, right now envisioning, at least at a base minimum, single family
Yeah.
separation, but
That's
you can
better. That's much better.
but you can expand that. It doesn't have to just be narrow.
I would not.
I mean, it makes sense of just from purely of the, you know, you go from, if it's everything's right here, then boom, it's a little bit of that. Okay, ease us into what we're looking at here. Yeah, that makes sense.
Is it common practice to have the setbacks, if you're gonna set a story, like it has to be by the third or by the fourth story, to base that on the surrounding buildings? Like if buildings next to it are 3 floors high, the setback, and the building or building is 5 floors, the setback would be at the 3rd story. Is that, you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, do that.
The neighboring building is 3 stories high, so the setback on the constructed building would have to be
Tapers at
no
that
higher
height.
than 3
Yeah, tapers
stories.
at that height.
I like that,
Mhm.
just me though.
Yeah, I was thinking about, areas of town that have larger homes, like, you mentioned, like, just hypothetically throwing up a apartment building on Main, right? Not that there's really
Please
space
don't.
necessarily, not that there's necessarily space, but how would that be versus like putting one up on, like, on Central, you
Mhm.
know?
Right. And it creates for cleaner lines, like just more uniformity, I guess, if you like that sort of thing.
Okay. So we're gonna switch gears into the other chapters. Michael's gonna briefly go over chapter 1212.
Yeah, so I don't have too many, really, I don't have questions for this piece, but one of the areas that is incorporated in these general development standards is your historic preservation chapter. That wasn't really in our technical scope of work to have an overhaul of those provisions. Where we read through it though, and we felt that there were some obvious areas that we wanted to improve, we did. So the 2 minor changes were made, really just for clarification in this chapter, specific to how we go about designating properties and what's submitted. Right now, it just requires that a boundary line be submitted as part of the application, but it doesn't really specify who's preparing that map. Is that someone who is legally certified or licensed? Is that a surveyor or an engineer? So we've built in a requirement that as part of that submittal application to submit to the city to put your house or to put your structure on the resource inventory list. There has to be an associated a plan developed by a licensed engineer or surveyor, kind of just basic. The other area that we further clarified are the additional types of descriptions that applicants would need to submit upon their request to be included in the historic resource inventory list. So we've added that there is a discussion as to the relevancy of the structure, and kind of more due diligence on the applicant's front to make a stronger case as to why the structure should be on the resource inventory list and why it should have and go through its protected status. That was kind of really it. We didn't really touch on the structure of what is reviewed, the development standards there within. But this is the development code where we do have the books open. So we are willing and open to take it to feedback on this chapter. I know historic preservation isn't necessarily handled specifically with Planning Commission, but are there items that you have heard in your purview or in your reading beyond just these minor clarifications that we've made that we should potentially be folding in or updating as part of this chapter?
And city staff is also evaluating other text within the section too. So there are other modifications that'll come before Planning Commission during a public review. So just you're aware.
I feel like you're kind of a historical.
The good folks on South Main have given me the task of attempting to expand historic districts in certain areas sometime in the next few years. And I hear those new rules and I see more work for myself and I see more resistance to getting something historically designated. So I am not for that. And that's just me personally. I guess I don't, what's the value to the citizen for having, or requiring an engineer, or what, I forget what you, the title that you mentioned.
Surveyor.
A surveyor.
It's a surveyor engineer.
What's the, I guess that's an added cost to whoever's submitting the application.
Sure.
And unless there's demonstrable value there, I would be opposed to that. Like for the citizen.
Okay.
I guess it would legitimize it though, right? Is that kind of
Right,
the main, it's so
because-
not just anybody can,
That's the,
Right.
You have to
that's the,
designate it.
that's
If you
the
want it to be
intent.
historic, you gotta declare it.
Is this just to identify the meets and bounds of real property? Is that what the surveyor's not gonna, that's all a surveyor is doing, and that's a description that's on the warranty deed to, that the owner has for the property. It's already I mean, unless it's a city lot, and then the plat should be, recorded with the, city engineer or the county engineer. I mean, I'm just curious, yeah, I'm kind of with you, Gavin. I don't understand the need for a professional surveyor to run the courses of a property if it already has been accepted as a description of the property for decades. Am I losing something here?
But what if it hasn't? Are there properties out there that aren't, that are in they're in the historic area, but they haven't been declared as such?
Wouldn't
My
they be
house.
on the plat of the city of Middletown?
Not if it hasn't been declared.
Well,
Over time, like if you want it to be a historic structure, you have to declare it.
Yeah, you do it yourself, but I do have, after moving here and having some issues with people who decide
I don't know.
this is what we're gonna do, it's not clear who can tell you what to do. It's not clear at all. I had a lot of issues with some people and different things that happened, so I could see where this would be more consistent. Well, like you said, the titles, who's doing it, who do you go to discuss it with, as far as, is it the planning commission, is it the city, is it, and it isn't consistent. It's these historical groups of people decide who's in and who's out. And that was my experience.
so to be, just to be clear then with this, say this is something that's more built in. Gabe is talking with his association, they hire an engineer to help with this process. That engineer then presents documentation to the city, and then the city says, okay, this is all in line, you submitted this, now this is a historic district here. Am I understanding this
It would be
correctly?
submitted as part of the request for modifying the historic boundary that exists.
Modifying, expanding, or new. So,
new.
or if there's a new historic district boundary that's created, you would have to have a professional surveyor or engineer basically define that boundary, and that would be included as part of the application that would go forward to
Sure.
to historic commission, to planning commission, to city council. It's a form of
Yeah.
legitimizing it, so someone isn't just drawing their own boundary.
I mean, how does the city, so currently we don't have that, so currently I could just come up and say, hey, this is the map I drew, I think this should be considered as part of the historic district. Does the city do any sort of, what's the due diligence, I guess, cause I'm not part of the historic commission, it's just on, just say yes or no, I mean,
But generally, you would end up going to the state and also the federal government. Which you create a district, and then you have to get 75% of the people within that district to agree, and then you've created it. But the city doesn't really have any say in it. I mean, they can object, but they really don't have say.
if that's the case, I don't know if we really need to have that extra layer in there then.
Well,
Prior to
I mean, what people
you know, or
need
to submit the
isn't really
application.
a surveyor as much as a historian.
Yeah.
You have people that tell what the building was used for in the past, et cetera.
I feel like the city's gonna do that anyway.
What?
An application is submitted, and so I'm a bit distrustful about placing that step before and as a prerequisite to an application being submitted.
So you're saying, you know, if somebody paid for a professional surveyor you surveyed out the boundaries, and the boundaries provided the city for review, that should the city decline, then whoever had paid that professional surveyor is just out. Is that kind of your argument there, or?
Saying boundaries are gonna get vetted regardless, I would assume, right? The city's gonna vet the boundaries regardless. So why would that requirement exist in order for my application to be accepted to the city?
But I would ask, and I'm just following up on, and I'm not disagreeing with you, but you're saying, when you say, I'm assuming the city vets it. Right. Well, that, I'm catching on the word assume. Does the city vet it? Or is the city edit here the vetting process? That's what I'm trying to understand.
I should also mention, all these are gonna go to the historic commission for their review and approval. So this is, I think, more or less of the intake of the application, kind of the submittal requirements, what are we gonna tell applicants they need at a base minimum to submit to the city for their consideration. But the ultimate determination, at least in this case, would come down to the historic commission upon their review of whether or not to modify that boundary. And then if it at all included a rezone, which I'm sure a historic boundary modification would, it would then also go to council to some degree.
So that's the vetting.
So that is kind of that vetting process. Besides staff taking it in, making sure that the application is complete, has all of the necessary requirements that they can use to reasonably draft a staff report and make that case to the historic commission.
I like that better. That is citizens vetting citizens' applications, as opposed to red tape being put up by the city in order to submit an application. I like the other option better. That's just me.
Usually you would not have a zone change to add on to it. They're already zoned residential.
But
one question I would have, and maybe I'm misunderstanding, I feel like I'm assuming with a historic district and stuff, there's certain credits and things, right? Is that where, because otherwise.
There's historical tax credits.
Okay.
Federal and
So
state.
that's the main, so that is that, and they get it because it has historical value because it's within that district, is that, am I understanding? I mean, cause for something to be designated to have historic value, I feel like it's kind of inherently subjective anyway, isn't it really? What's the objective?
That's why you go through the process.
Yeah,
So-
but what's it, like, the surveyor and stuff is more of like legally what's there, but like, how do they tell what is or isn't?
The surveyor doesn't determine what's historic.
Uh-huh.
He just looks at the land and says, okay,
Oh,
here's
okay.
where it is, right? The second piece would be like, okay, I'm gonna submit my app to the Ohio Historic Connection, which then is gonna go to the National Registry and say, hey, I wanna declare my property historic based off of the set of
Okay.
criteria I qualify, I believe I qualify.
Okay, so
And then,
I think my misunderstanding was thinking of it as more of them deciding whether or not what was historic versus, so if I'm understanding you correctly, this is sort of looking at it like, if I was to turn in a development plan, I need to have an architect, like stamped plans, versus I can't just draw it up and turn it in.
not Middletown.
Yeah. So this is sort of, so, in essence, okay, I think I was kind of misunderstanding the whole point of this. So this is sort of saying, it's more for the plans then, is that correct? Or of like, when they get turned in, they can't just be, I can't just draw a map and I'm just a guy and I turn it in.
It's just a proposal that inception on an application,
Yeah.
these are some of the criteria you gotta have.
Yeah,
If they don't have it, we turn it back.
yeah.
Like, this is the policy, you need to
Yeah.
have these things.
Is my comparison to having like stamped architectural plans, is
That
that
comes way
track?
later, that comes way later.
That's even later than what we're talking about.
Yeah, because you'll submit your app,
Yeah, yeah.
say, hey, I have this piece of property, this is what I wanna do,
Mhm.
we'll look at it. Okay, and then, when they come to be ready for construction, they submit construction drawings.
But,
Oh, no,
Mr.
so I'm
Person,
not-
your comparison is the procedural.
Yes, I'm not saying literally, I'm saying like,
So to his point, if I want to expand the South Main Historic District. So in order to do that, if I want to send that application in, rather than I just took the back of this piece of paper and drew, okay, now hit Yankee Road, and go up a little bit more to Broad
Okay.
Street and go over.
So whether it had a structure or not, you just wanna extend the boundary.
He's saying for the application for, and tell me if I'm speaking off
Sure.
turn for you, if it's a district expansion or if historic designation, in order to get that application in at the city level to then go and be further processed at the state or federal designation, that it's requiring engineering.
Gotcha.
And that, I'm just, I wanna make sure
That's-
that's what I was understanding of what we, this whole time.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's what we're saying.
Yeah, so, I was trying to draw more of a, comparison there, not so much of a, thank you, yes.
Sorry,
You're all good. Because that's where I misunderstood it. I thought we were trying to say of more so deciding whether or not something is historic, not how the actual application is. I mean, is that an issue that we've run up against, of that because people are, a layman is drawing these things up and putting it in, that it causes problems?
I would say yes, that's why we're bringing it up.
Well, if that's the case, then, not to make your life harder, but.
Sure. So another example I can think of is one request or suggestion that I made, folks I represent made to city council about the Manchester and what goes on there to replace it, is that the Manchester building was historic, but the land is not, the block is not. It's not part of the North Main Historic District. So what we were requesting is, we would like that to be subject to historic preservation code standards. Whatever goes there will not be currently. So
I think it is.
I think the building is, but not the block.
Okay, the building is, yeah.
Yeah. So in order to make that, what goes there subject to historic preservation standards, that block would have to be designated, as far as I understand it. So if I were to submit that application, which I probably will have to if it's gonna be submitted, with this new rule, I would have to employ a surveyor to make my application legitimate.
Stamp it.
Yeah, I just don't. I feel like that's prohibitive, and if the city and this commission cares about it, they will make sure that it gets done correctly.
I mean, does the city have, I don't even really know the structure, to be honest, and do we have surveyors that have the bandwidth to, do that? And do they currently, I guess?
Oh, yeah, clearly. There's surveyors.
They wouldn't be.
Deputies that do it.
I was gonna say, but they wouldn't be city employees.
No.
So it would be somewhere down the line, somebody would have to pay, if it's going into a shape file or it's being recorded at, whether it's a recorder's office or something of that nature. I think somewhere in the chain, we'd have to have some professional consultants actually dictate what that looks like.
They're licensed by the state also.
I would prefer if I submitted the application and then this commission said this needs to have a clear boundary drawn by a professional. I would say absolutely good. I just don't see why that step has to be before I submit or part of the application I submit it. And I forgot to say, with the Manchester block example, it's the Manchester block. If we want to draw the line down to the inch about what that is, okay, but my application is just for the Manchester block. Everybody knows what that is.
And there's gotta be, again, I did some real estate work, and I can't imagine that the Manchester property, which is over here, the deed, because there's been lenders involved, there's been transfers of ownership. I know the city of Middletown transferred it for $1 and got it back for $1. I would hope that there should be some provision in there that upon the presentation of a certified copy of a previous professionally engineered or surveyed description of the property, that would suffice. I can't imagine having to pay $1,500 for a duplicate survey of a piece of property that I would almost have to guarantee has a legal description. It would not have gotten to where it is now without one.
That's a great point.
Just
Yeah.
can't.
And that might be an exception, but I don't
Yeah.
think we wanna rule that out. I still
Oh,
think
no,
we need
no,
the
no, I wouldn't
requirement.
rule it out.
Yeah.
But upon evidence of a legal description of the property that's being suggested, I can't imagine that.
You wouldn't be able to get financing without being able to
Well, you
approve that
can't,
anyway.
you can't. The mortgage companies are never gonna loan money on something that's not specifically described.
I think
It's not
though,
going to.
I 100% agree with you on when it's one property.
Yeah.
What about when it's these multiple?
They all have deeds.
So it would be-
All property in this city has an owner attached to it by virtue of a deed. And it has a description in it. You all bought houses, I think. Now, it may say lot number 1503 on the recorded plat of the city of Middletown. It may do that. And then there's,
And
then you
then
have
it
to-
becomes, here's the group of 15 houses, pull each one.
yeah,
So-
simple.
So I think, I mean, when you submit an application, like, for review, I don't know that we need a boundary description to conduct a review, right? That's the purpose of the application. I think we just do it on parcel, but, you know, as it progresses and we get into like actual construction, things like that, we do need it.
Like a condition of
Yeah.
approval?
Yeah, like as a condition of approval, before we move on to that stuff. Yeah, but as far as a review, I mean, to your point, we can look up the parcel, we know where the land is. I don't need a legal description telling me like, you know, 10 degrees south by southeast, to, you know.
500 feet.
500 feet, right, yeah, exactly. So,
So, could we say it requires that work to be as a condition of approval, but leave it, don't automatically put the onus on the submitter of the application?
well, it'll be on the applicant. The applicant will need to do it, just not in that
Just
stage.
depends on the evidence that the owner has to document the legal description of the property that they want designated.
Then I would lean heavily on what Mr. Cash said about if there's prior legal boundaries established, absolutely the applicant should be able to use that. That should be sufficient.
Yeah, if you can get it now, a boundary's a boundary, I don't care who you get it from.
Mhm.
Yeah, whatever.
And I think with that too is the community development director in their purview also has within there, they determine upon the submittal of an application whether or not that application is complete and whether or not it can be processed. So if there is a concern, at least from the intake perspective, staff already does work with applicants if they do receive an application and it doesn't have necessarily all the check boxes of items that they need. So, I mean, I guess to your point, if someone were to come in for a preliminary application and hand draw a map, and if it was articulable enough to the community development director and city staff to read that and process it, then I think we've kind of served the purpose. I think within their purview, though, they would be able to go, this isn't, I can't read this, I need something different, I need something, and they could kind of go back and work with the applicant through that process. That process is still there. I do like this idea of a condition of approval. I think that's something that we can take and look at.
But I just wanna be clear, like, when it comes to hand-drawn stuff and things like that, like, we won't accept it.
Yeah.
We won't accept it.
Well, what's the rule now?
That's what,
What's the rule now? I'm asking you a question.
So as
Yeah.
it states now, it says at a minimum,
Mhm.
and it lists only 3 application requirements.
And it just says boundary description.
And it just says boundary description, doesn't say currently doesn't specify of a map being provided. Naturally, this is a discretionary type of approval, so it does go to the historic commission for their review, so there is some discretion involved with that.
So currently it could be, I could give a long list of, to this alley, thence to this street, thence to, and that would meet the requirements as currently.
If the community development director found that it met in their understanding and their reading of the code, it met the implications of the requirements of what the application was, then yes.
but it's gotta be specific.
But
That's why I
sure.
say like, we would,
Yeah.
on this conversation, based off of this text that we're talking about, it would be turned back.
Yeah, I mean, I
Because
think.
we
of-
don't, what are we talking about here? What is it that that you're asking us to review?
Yeah, I
I
mean.
don't know.
When we did, so I work for the city of Germantown, I helped create our DORA in our downtown, and our surveyor for the city had to do that for me. And I mean, for not that big a space, I mean, it was pages of his exact, so, I mean, like, a layman you just would not be able to.
It's true.
Even though, in theory, you could, but you wouldn't.
You don't want to. Because you get into legal problems when you start being general and it's not specific.
There
I
are
just
so
think-
many Vinces. Never read so many Vinces before.
I think like, we need to have it, but I don't know that we need to have it at its inception. You know, and so as we get into the process, we can play out, you know, and say, you know, it does need to be done by an engineer or an attorney, like that, it's gotta be professionally drawn up, whether you own a home or not, like, we gotta know what's going on. But at the same time, like, maybe it could happen at, you know, preliminary plat. Maybe it could happen as a condition of final plat approval. You know, but maybe it can happen as a condition of recordation. Like, when we get, I'm not as concerned about when we get it as much as I am that we get it.
And I'm concerned about when I have to give it. So I'm also with that. I'm with you that it should be
But I don't know if that's the
provided,
conception, right?
but like later on in the process
Yeah.
is fine with me.
Yeah.
Of course it has to be done correctly.
Yeah.
I would just like the process to be able to get started,
Seems fair.
without,
Jacob?
you know, I don't want red tape right at the beginning of the process because I can't afford to hire a surveyor.
Yeah, I mean, to that extent, when we're talking, especially someone with this legalese, I mean, yeah, you'd want a professional surveyor to the extent of can at least get in the process. I mean, I would want to see somebody spend like $7,000 on surveying for an entire block or several blocks, and it's, yeah,
And the
we're not
project
going to.
dies.
Yeah,
I
no,
get
that's
that,
fair,
yeah.
that's fair.
Okay.
Sorry guys, appreciate it.
That's-
Oh, of course.
That's a good question.
This is great. This is why we're here. This is
So,
awesome.
we have a few more sections. I can tell you that there's only like two or three questions left. So cognizant of time, we're gonna move through some of these that don't have the questions, but just lay out the modifications. Jacob, I'm hoping you can jump in with Tom as it relates to the parkland dedication and the credits discussion.
Talk
Tom,
about
you
park
wanna-
impact fee?
Yeah, you wanna talk about this idea?
Okay, I have a rub on this one, okay? Because there's a waiver of, so first of all, I don't believe necessarily that it's staff's position to grant waivers on council adopted policy. Like, that puts a little bit of pressure on us to say, hey, you know what? It's okay if you don't listen to council. Like, I don't think that's our rule, okay? The second part is on a waiver, why on earth would we ever give money back to a developer? Why would we ever do that, you guys?
Speaking my language.
Yeah, I love it.
So, I'm not saying we be shrewd, okay, because there are instances that maybe that we stand to get something. Okay, then we'd be flexible. But I think you leave it, if we could, if you're comfortable with it, you leave it to the discretion to staff, and then we can go, and I think it's a matter of policy, it goes to council, not planning commission. I think planning commission is a land use authority, and you guys call the shots on land, but not necessarily our fees and our financial structure.
Agreed.
So, I would put that pressure on them, and we can provide a recommendation by saying, hey, we recommend that we waive 50% or 100% just because the city stands to get something. If we don't get anything, we don't give anything.
Right.
Seems fair.
Agreed.
I have a huge problem with that.
Yeah, I can agree with that. I was looking over the park impact fee stuff in preparation for our most recent meeting, which shouldn't go into that 'cause it's still ongoing, but, I agree on your analysis of it.
Unless we're getting something. We have to get something significant.
So that's the rationale behind 12-1406.
And I don't hate developers, but I gotta know, like, I'm all about what are we getting? Like, we have to get something if we're gonna get something. That's all I'm saying.
Not just something,
Yeah.
a quality.
Yeah.
Quality.
Yeah. Well, that was quick.
What we were shooting for, right?
Yeah. 16, landscaping and buffering. Updated figures and graphics just to help clarify some of the standards. There are graphics included, but some more illustrative examples I think are necessary in order to, I think, augment some of the text language that's included. We expanded the required landscape area adjacent to public streets. Right now it's at 2 feet. The recommendation from staff was to expand it to 5 feet. And then there were some new provisions that were added pertaining to landscape maintenance and enforcement of landscaping to make sure that it is properly maintained. That was probably one of the biggest missing components of that entire chapter. Talked about great landscaping, but then what happens when something dies, it's removed, who enforces it? So there's a new landscaping maintenance section put in. After review with city staff, we went through a thorough discussion of the buffering, the type of planting, how many trees are required based on development. It's pretty substantial. And staff didn't make any other recommended changes after working with us to that section. So the edits to this section were relatively minor.
This is one of my wheelhouses, so
Sure.
this is where I paid the most attention in reading over. There are just a couple things that that kind of stood out to me in the. I know you don't have it pulled up on at least the big screen, but like the purpose statement right at the beginning of the chapter, 12:16:01. There was the sorry, my notes are not as well written as I had it in the moment, and now I don't hear. Can I see it on yours right here, just so I can articulate it? Okay. Let's see. So the provide visual screening where appropriate, but for the part D here, and I'm just going to read it for everybody. The protect and enhance property values and aesthetic qualities through quality design and buffering of different land uses. I just feel like there's a where appropriate should be on there as well. I don't know if that's where coming from my ecology forward stance, ecology over aesthetics, viable habitable biosphere over how it looks personally. That's just something that stood out to me. Then also with the part B, it's we're trying to prevent soil erosion, sedimentation, and I would like to add habitat loss in there. Our landscaping is this is one of the places where the code really has the ability to influence our ecological conditions as well. So I know that there's an emphasis that's being being placed on native plants that already existed in there, it looked like, but I just feel like preventing habitat loss through the standards that we're trying to implement is definitely something that should be put in there. And then there's just one thing that's a little bit more of a nitpick, or that I want to clarify. If you would scroll down to the part D with the planting standards, there's the part D, section 3, where it says that the newly planted trees, they shall be balled and burlapped. With that verbiage there, does it mean that it is all nursery stock that is planted is required to be of a balled and burlapped?
The way it's written,
yeah.
yes.
Okay.
The way that it's written.
So I just feel like that goes against, not to make you scroll up again, but the section A of the purpose statement it says, sorry, I wrote it down on here, to ensure survival of the trees. Balled and burlapped roots, they are a really weak structure for plants, just especially like large canopy trees. So I just feel like there's a contradiction in the means and the ends of that. I'm not sure how else to remedy that. I don't know the bald and burlap, like shall be bald and burlapped, if that's something that's taken out of that nursery stock standard that I can't
Mhm.
remember the name of.
Okay.
That's in there. I just feel like Middletown is a recognized like Tree City USA. We've got a pretty good urban canopy. Keeping that for the long term should mean planting practices that are going to actually ensure the long-term survival of the tree. Just to paint it for you guys a little more. The bald and burlap trees, 2 inches in diameter at the breast height, that's what the DBH is on those tables. That is gonna be a pretty developed tree as far as the canopy goes, but the root system is not developed. So that plant is gonna be putting all of its energy into trying to grow intact root systems that can support the larger canopy. So it doesn't, like when you plant trees like that, they don't look like they grow for several years if they even survive that initial stage, depending on the irrigation in the site. So I just feel like that's something that is I see all over the place in all of the municipalities that I go to. And it just drives me crazy. I'd like to see that corrected here, but.
What's the purpose of
The
that,
purpose,
of that rule?
The purpose of the current phrasing,
The balding, yeah.
it's easier to transport, but if you change the standards to be that you can plant smaller saplings, like it says, I can't remember where it is in there. I think, oh, actually, I did write down the 12-16-1 table, where it says that there's a 2-inch diameter at breast height for canopy and overstory trees. That means that you have to buy trees that have that diameter, and you're only gonna be able to get that from a bald and burlapped stock. But those trees are not gonna be prone to surviving in the long term. It's just a whole mess, like, in execution.
Is this just a way for the city to kind of achieve process efficiencies? Is that why- is that the
Probably,
purpose of
I'm
it?
sure there's a good reason for it, but when we're trying to keep it in line with a purpose statement, which is looking at the long-term survival of the trees and the plants that we're planting, it runs counter to that, so.
Well, I think what we could do is, evaluate that language
Mhm.
and the type of plantings, so it's consistent with the overall purpose and intent, and bring back some recommended, strike-through language
Mhm.
in order to, I think, meet the objectives that you're looking
Mhm.
at.
And-
With your background, I think it's important.
Yeah, it's not the end of the world. I am pretty happy with the state of it overall, but I just wanna use an anecdote of mine to understate this. I planted, both like an apple tree that was bald and burlapped, and then I planted another one that was just a 1-year-old sapling. They are now the same height, even though the sapling is technically younger, because all of that growth, they established the root systems from a young age, instead of having to reestablish them when they're planted at an older stage, they actually end up growing faster and healthier in the long term.
Mhm.
So that's my reasoning on that, but like I said, not the end of the world. I've just been waiting all meeting to mention that.
This is your
so-
chapter.
Yeah, this is my chapter.
It's fast.
That's all I have for that.
Okay.
So, Thank you.
Any
Thank
other
you.
thoughts on landscaping or buffering?
I like it.
What AJ said.
Parking. So the 12-18, the main changes, modifications, updated figures, yes. Again, we tied it back to the applicability of the intersection visibility, and we're talking about shrubs. Shrubs from the landscaping, and then when we're talking about parking, what can fall within those boundaries to mitigate any pedestrian and vehicle interaction. We expanded on objective criteria for when parking standards apply. So if you have an existing parking lot, what's the trigger to bring it up to conformance? Look at transitioning some of the terminology language. So parking lot, parking facility, parking area was used throughout. It wasn't consistent. We kind of narrowed it down to a more generalized term of a parking area. just trying to find a best practice of language. The parking space requirement table has some updates to it. In some cases, parking standards were reduced. In some areas, they were increased. And then there was some clarity made behind that. And then there was an addition of bicycle parking standards if bicycle parking is included. So we're not mandating that you have to have bicycle parking, but if you do include it, it needs to meet X amount of standards. And then shown here on the screen, I don't expect you to read this, but this is the parking, a snippet of the parking standard table. Everything in red is obviously edited. So for example, we expanded the type of parking that's required for different classifications of schools, based on employee, based on student, based on classroom. These align with best practices. And expanded on community spaces, cleared up some language as it relates to hospitals, and then some other uses that city staff identified. In some cases, some of the uses were fairly overparked based on current planning practice, so we made some reductions. In other cases, underparked, and we increased it.
Yeah, I mean, you can start to go here. I think the one that stands out to me the most is the commercial requirement, commercial and retail. Currently, it's 1 space per 300 square feet, and we reduced that, so it's 1 space per 400 feet now. I think that is us looking around and seeing a lot of over-parked areas, a lot of over-parked development, looking at kind of what is best practice as far as kind of what your other surrounding jurisdictions are doing, and we try to align it with what we feel is gonna be more appropriate for kind of the shopping trends today in development.
And even in having that reduction, it's not a substantial reduction. I know that's typically the concern of community members, like, oh my gosh, are we now gonna be battling for parking in commercial areas? Very minor when you actually calculate the numbers, but it is a reduction of sorts. The only question I have for the commission is, it's very broad, and I don't know if I almost regret including this question, to be honest with you. Because it literally just says, are there other types of parking solutions or innovative methods for parking that you've seen in other jurisdictions that you think would work here? I know it's really open-ended. I was looking through my paperwork going, God, I should delete this. But it's just something I wanted to just run by. Lots of different examples.
I don't know if you've seen this in Germantown, but like what I've seen, big trend here is instead of like parking minimums, you gotta have so many parking stalls, they're going to maximums.
Yes.
You're not allowed to do more than this many, because of the impervious surface and how much it takes up. And you'll have one use here and another use here, and they share the parking lot.
Yes.
So, I don't know if you wanna include that, or maybe you already did, but there's some trends that are changing in how parking's being used.
Parking maximum is relatively new in some areas, and we see that a lot. Parking maximum is become
We haven't come up against that yet.
It's just a gee whiz, like.
or the shared parking, or when you're looking at a multi-tenant development, not the old style of parking would have been to look at each use and go, that's a restaurant, that takes this amount, that's a store. Instead, the trend now is to say, what's the total square footage of the entire development? 4 spaces per 1,000 square feet. Doesn't matter. It's combined, and it's an incentive to not overpark, and it allows flexibility when those spaces turn over. Because you can have 1 space turn over to a higher use and you can't add parking, it's already built. So that's another trend that we're seeing.
The point of establishing the minimums was because there was a fear that parking wasn't gonna be provided. And I think now we're living in an area where we acknowledge that in most cases, parking seems to be overly provided. And so that's why that's kind of the same philosophy of, do we specify amenities, or do we allow the developer to provide the amenities? The same kind of holds true in parking standards is, developers aren't going to, depending on what they're building, they're not going to purposely underpark their development. They're going to park it to the standard that they feel is they're going to get the clientele, at least they should be. That's kind of the mindset. And so that's kind of the thought process with maximums, in addition to impervious surface coverage, is a little more onus on the developer and the applicant to provide, at least in their minds, what they feel is gonna be adequate, and then setting a maximum threshold so they're not over parking to some degree.
have to say the parking maximum, that's a new one for me. Intriguing. I am familiar with, trying to calculate based off of the impervious, surface. I don't know, for me, ideally, I'm more of like a abolish minimums entirely kind of guy, but I also realize that's not entirely feasible at this moment in this area. So, I think rebalancing it the way that you have is definitely sufficed, but any other thoughts, especially when it comes to maximums? No?
Okay. You all have made it this far. Look at this, the last one, 1220, signage, everyone's favorite topic. Again, this should look familiar. We're talking about graphics, we're talking about the intersection visibility again. You don't want signs to block that. We refined the prohibited sign types to include billboards and off-premise signs, so it starts to eliminate what's considered an antiquated sign type. That is a best planning practice that's carried through most jurisdictions. We expanded standards and allowances for drive-through signs. And if you think about drive-throughs right now, the way the standards are written is you have like a menu board, but the last time you went through a drive-through, how many menu boards, how many
Drive
entry,
lanes.
drive signs, stacking lane signs, the whole 9 yards. So just trying to be reflective of what the actual development is. I'm gonna skip to the last bullet real quick. We moved the non-conforming sign regulations out of this chapter and moved them to section 122408, which is in your non-conforming section. So keep all regulations together. The biggest change in chapter 1220 is the introduction of a master sign program process. And the intent of a master sign program process is to have consistency in sign design for larger developments. So if a development in this case has multiple tenants, multiple buildings, that property owner has to come in with a sign program that all tenants then have to abide by. So there's a design consistency in signage. This is a new concept that's being brought forward for consideration. It's on the property owner to develop the sign program, bring it to the city reviews it, and then any tenant, and keeps it on file, any tenant that comes in then has to abide by that sign program, which dictates placement of sign, the type of sign, the lighting. It's really up to the property owner to make that, that sign program that the city would approve. There would be a permitting structure that would have to apply to this, and that is still in flux with city staff as we're trying to gauge whether this is something that the city should even consider, or if that's not even an issue.
So this would be an additional set of optional standards that the developer, the owner of the building would.
So for example, I mean, the town mall site, that would have a master, under this, could have a master sign program that all tenants would have to abide by certain sign criteria that's specific to that site. If you have a one-off shop out here downtown, they would just abide by the normal sign regulations. But if you're part of a larger cohesive development, there's consistency behind it.
And let's say at some point that this master sign program, that the tenants or the owner, they want to change it, are there provisions in there for guiding that process, or?
Yeah, something we wanted to discuss first, before we fully fleshed out the idea. Typically, we would include some sort of an amendment process. I think the one area where I see the downside of sign programs, the downside is when they remain stagnant. Because whereas your sign code may develop and redevelop and be written over time and may adjust with modern technology, if you don't have an applicant or a property owner who's also gonna stay up and wanna amend their master sign program to incorporate new signage, then you may end up with a development that has really outdated signage compared to other portions. And so what we find is there is a clear we find beneficial is to establish a clear process for amending that master sign program. We don't necessarily want to make that an onerous process, because in some cases, what we want people to modernize and refresh, but there does need to be some sort of review of that to make sure it's still within the findings of the criteria. So I think who would review that amendment, I think is open to discussion. Is that something that the staff could handle? Is that under the purview of planning commission? But an amendment process would something that we would recommend to build into that.
I feel like that's something that might fall under the architectural review board, but I'm not entirely sure what's within their. You don't know?
I don't think so.
Is the kind of the main goal, if I'm understanding correctly, of having a master sign program such as this, mostly aesthetic? Is that correct? Or just so it's a same?
It's aesthetic, and it's also not having an over proliferation of signs.
Like, so, like, you have.
So you're starting to limit it too.
Yeah, you don't have a sign, the same company doesn't have a sign on the side, both sides, the front, the back. They wanna add a parapet, it's on windows.
And they have a street facing sign and a pylon and a pole and.
I mean,
And they've all got the flashing neon open.
And then they have the gorilla on the top, yeah, it's just,
Exactly.
yeah.
Is there not already anything though in like our standards that already prevent that though?
There are, I think this is more looking at it from like a comprehensive site-wide standpoint. So what would happen now is if you had like a multi-tenant new development that would come in, it would be up to the developer to hopefully provide consistent signage, or up to the individual tenants to provide consistent signage throughout the development. And so what we're proposing is, if you meet a threshold, to have that be a consistent standard for the entire development. It benefits, one more point, it benefits from the consistency of the development standpoint, but it's also really helpful for staff. If an application comes in or a new tenant comes in, they go to their master sign program and they can see very clearly, but staff's perspective and the applicant's perspective is, they have this one kind of rule book. It's almost like a PUD for your signs, and it's like, these are your specific standards, this is what you follow, staff's gonna reference that, the applicant would reference that, as opposed to potentially having different sign designs and standards and types throughout a single development.
So for instance, if our code says a sign can be anywhere from 2x4 to 50x50, but within this now, it's every single sign in this development has to be 3x5 instead.
Potentially.
Potentially.
It's really up to how creative they wanna be.
And you'll see it in larger commercial centers. They may not, some communities may not have a master sign program, but when you look at larger commercial centers, you'll notice that all the signage is of same centering on the building, has same height. That's essentially what this is doing, but codifying that. It also dictates like when you have like a multi-tenant sign along a public street, how many businesses are located on that.
Yeah.
And sign programs dictate that, typically based on square footage of
This
spaces.
From a staff point of view, is this something that would make things easier from a permitting process, or is it? I mean, obviously, anytime you're adding something new, it's gonna take a little bit of time and add because you're getting used to that. And in the long run, is this something that is more work for staff or makes staff's life easier, do we think?
Signage is always gonna be a nightmare.
Oh, yeah.
Like signage is awful. But like with some of the special interest areas that the city has, it could be beneficial, because it's more so about how it looks. You know, where it's placed to provide right uniformity instead of clustering, or some big, huge, 300 square foot digital display that shows a movie that's blocking all people's vision as they're going up.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Because technically
like something
it's-
crazy and dumb, So, but like those, like where those, the pylon to the right, like those are really good, clean.
So then there's like two questions that build upon this, is that the current development code allows for wall signage on residential dwelling units. And this was something that kind of piqued our interest. We read it and went, oh, I understand maybe a bed and breakfast potentially, but, and it goes.
We don't, I was gonna say even residential, because the one bed and breakfast I can think of is the Sword Mansion, back when the Sword was originally gonna do a bed and breakfast. Even in that, I think we've very much we made that be a mixed use consideration, at least historically, so more of a commercial zoning.
Well, as it's written now, it has an allowance that's not your address numbers, and so we flagged that and staff flagged that to strike, and so we're just saying, best practice would say no, it's not appropriate, but we're just asking the question, number one, and then the second question we wanted to put out there is pole signs are currently allowed within the city, not everywhere, but pole signs are allowed. Should these signs be prohibited in favor of pylon signs? Pole signs are an antiquated form of signage, they're starting to go away. The pylon or monument signs it's just a more common practice.
Prettier too.
But, so just something to float by the commission.
I just had a question about number one, actually. In this case, would like a mural count as a sign on a residential building?
Oh, this is.
I was,
Gosh, I don't know if I wanna go down that.
I was
No.
gonna ask,
Okay.
I was gonna ask about that, because that's something we've had in Germantown is an ongoing, because we last year initiated the
no.
mural program, and that became a whole thing where there was like a coffee shop wanted to make a mural, but they wanted to, have a coffee cup and stuff. It makes sense, but then it's, okay, is that a sign for your coffee shop? Because
Yes.
it tells somebody you can have coffee there, it doesn't have your name on it, and they were like, okay, so only 20% can be representative of the business, and it just got to the point where like, this is not working.
And you run into free speech issues. We had
Yeah.
this is near and dear to us, we had a planning commission last night, in California, and the mural discussion sucked the air out of the room.
Oh, God. Sorry to.
It
awaken
turned
your trauma.
into a free speech legal mess,
You
so
brought
I
up-
wouldn't recommend going that route.
You did bring up a good point, though. I mean, murals are something that we've continued, especially more in the downtown area, how they're addressed. I don't know what that answer is, but I think it's something figuring out, so we do have a response, right?
I think in our minds, we would like to keep commercial speech separate from like art. The way we do that though can be very problematic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I'm glad
would-
you brought up that example of the
great
coffee cup with because that encapsulates the problem in a nutshell.
Yeah.
But would this include those places like up and down Roosevelt where people do have, I could say this is Roosevelt, apartment, something, some of those buildings have
Not
signs along the side.
Not necessarily, like some of the multi-unit developments
Yeah.
that have signage, that's actually an allowed sign
Okay.
type.
Okay, so-
This was, in the code right now, it's referring to single unit, which just seemed off.
Yeah,
Something
single
seemed off.
Residents.
Yeah.
Yeah, true.
And it's not like your political snipe sign or blade sign you stick in your, it's not that, that's protected, you
Okay.
can't go after stuff like that. So this is just something that we flagged and went, this is, unless this is really unique, I would say remove it.
I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yes, I gotta find
Just
one.
seems odd.
And what are the thoughts on like pole and pylons? Is there a real feeling about it, or is it just kinda?
Mm, My feeling is that I wish we didn't grant so many grandfathered in pole signs, but,
Well, essentially the sign, until the sign has, unless it undergoes substantial modification, the sign would continue, it would just be non-conforming.
That's the current situation with all of our billboards in town.
Yep.
yeah.
So, that's why they look the way they do, and that's why they haven't moved, is because
Mhm.
modification then creates this no longer non-conformity.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, I definitely would have a preference for pylon or monument signs over pole signs, period.
Another thing to consider that's not on here, which Middletown falls into this category, are communities that are adjacent to freeways and interstates. It's not uncommon to have like freeway-oriented or interstate-oriented signage. So when you're humming down the road, you don't have 20 pole signs that line the highway. You'll have dedicated signage that's consistent with the city design. That's something else that I don't have here, but that's very common, and you have the interstate go right through. So there's ways you can do that too, and you can see that up and down the corridor between Dayton and Cincinnati. There are communities that do that, that start to have more cohesive signage visibility. So things to consider.
That's a good point, because that was my first worry was, we're right by 75, we do want people to be able to see what we have, but, yeah, if I'm driving on the highway now, I'm just looking for the little sign that says restaurants that are here.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Or, personally, like, the way that I get around, I always either look up where I am going. I never am like, I see a sign like, oh, I should check that out. Because, well, let's be honest, most of the places that have these type of signs, you've already tried somewhere else.
Mm.
But that's just how I feel about that, but.
So that pretty much concludes all of the sections. I think the next point we wanna make is that, we're going through all of the edits, so all the prior study sessions, compiling everything. Our goal is to pull together a public review draft. Dates are still to be determined on when that gets rolled out. There is upcoming engagement tied to this, so we had our first workshop back in October of last year. There's a second one slated, a date to still be determined. Right now, it's tentatively scheduled for June. And there will be another study session, minimum one more with Planning Commission on a public review draft, unless there are additional things that we bring back for consideration. But as of right now, the project is on track, it's been on schedule, these meetings have been great. Again, what I thought would be a quicker meeting.
Love it.
But this is the feedback that we need, so this is fantastic. So I really appreciate everyone taking the time out of your days to go through this.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. So I'll hand it back to the chair.
Okay. Does anybody else have anything that they would like to add? No? Is everybody in favor of adjournment?
Yes.
All right, so moved.
Thank you all for your
Thank you.
We adjourn at 7:21.
All right.
Red light.
I'm game shaming.